Welcome back, everyone. This is your host, the DN WhatIf 3.0, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku has the power to nullify quirks? A special shout out to the original creator, Note 147. Please make sure to show your support by checking out their work from the description. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The common area of Class 1 as Heights Alliance was bustling and lively. Most of the students congregated in the living room and dining area of the ground floor, some of them watching TV and chatting about anything and everything, while others were sitting by themselves and were either looking through their phones or were working on homework. The few students that weren't present, most notably Bakugo and Todoroki, were likely hauled up in their dorm rooms and were either doing homework or simply enjoying some peace and quiet. All in all, it was a very nice setting to be greeted to. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, and it seemed to help Aizu feel less tense, more relaxed and at ease. Aizu looked around in awe as he took in everything around him. Class 1 as dorm building was nothing special. It was essentially the exact same as the dorm he and Mirio lived in, but it was the colorful cast of students inhabiting the building that grabbed his interest. Nijire smiled with glee at the expression on the child's face. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. "Hey, everyone!" Mina called out loudly, which caught everyone's attention. "We have a couple of guests. Come and meet them." Everyone glanced over at the two unfamiliar people standing in the foyer with some of the girls surrounding them. The moment everyone's eyes landed on the green-haired little boy, it was as if whatever they were doing prior to their arrival was far less interesting as they came over to see him. Some of them stayed a few feet away and chose to observe from afar while the others wanted to get up close and in person, though they made sure not to encroach on the boy's personal space too much, given the way he was semi-hiding behind Nijire. "No way. So, it's true. There's actually a kid living on campus with us. Well, if we're being technical, we would also be considered kids as well. He's so tiny and cute. He kinda reminds me of a little bunny or a kitten. We still don't know if he's one of the teachers or not." As some of the students had their back-and-forth discussions and monologues, others took the time to actually greet the child and get to know him better. Nijire coaxed Aizu into coming out of his hiding place behind her legs and released his hand while taking a step back. She kept a watchful eye on the child as he was greeted by a gorgeous tall girl with long black hair styled in a messy ponytail and black, kind-looking eyes. She got down onto her knees a couple of feet in front of the boy and flashed him a tender smile. "Hello there," she greeted politely. "My name is Momo Yaoyorozu. I'm the vice president of Class 1A. What's your name?" The boy looked back at Nijire, who smiled softly at him and gave a curt nod, as if to encourage him to be polite and talk with the girl. He looked back at her and replied shyly with, "Aizu." Momo smiled even more. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Aizu. We've heard so much about you. You seem like such a lovely boy." She then held out her hand to the boy, who reached a timid hand out and placed it in hers. Momo shook his hand while still smiling, and Aizu seemed to relax a little. Then, some of the others began to follow suit and introduce themselves to the boy while allowing him to take in their unique and somewhat strange appearances. So far, it seemed to be going very well. Aizu seemed to be relaxing little by little and even began to approach some of the students on his own and would ask questions about each of their quirks, especially those who had unique physical features such as Ojiro, Mina, and Siro. Then, Aizu noticed Tokoyami leaning against the wall near the kitchen with his arms crossed over his chest, appearing to not be as interested in getting to know the little boy, but not in a way that made him come off as cold or uncaring. He probably didn't want to frighten the child with his appearance. That seemed to not be the case, however, as Aizu began to walk towards the avian teen, albeit cautiously, before stopping just a few feet from him. Tokoyami hummed in a low voice as he acknowledged the boy, who tilted his head and gazed at him curiously. "Hello," Tokoyami greeted in a flat but calming tone. "I am Fumikage Tokoyami, and you are Aizu, I take it?" Aizu gazed at the avian teen with a wondrous glint in his big green eyes, likely taking in the teen's strange appearance. But before he could say a word, Aizu let out a small gasp and jumped back a bit as Tokoyami's quirk, Dark Shadow, popped out from his body and was now leering down at the boy with an ominous gaze. "Oh, who is this? A new friend? Nice to meet small fry. The name's Dark Shadow. Oh, don't mind Fumi, he can be a real party pooper sometimes. Which is where I come in. Haha." The shadowy creature paid no mind to its owner, who was now watching the scene completely shocked and appalled by what his quirk was doing. The other students watched the exchange with a bit of nervousness and hesitation, unsure of what to do. "Dark Shadow, cease this behavior at once," Tokoyami hissed. Dark Shadow turned to look at its owner and snickered. "Ah, come on, Fumi. Don't be such a stick in the mud. I'm just trying to be friendly with the lil guy. Nothing wrong with that, right?" Tokoyami let out an irritated groan at his quirk's disobedience. "Dark Shadow, I mean it. Stop this behavior and return to me this instant before you end up frightening the boy dash," but he was cut off when he and everyone else was stunned by what happened next. Rather than being scared of the shadowy monster, Aizu began to giggle and smile as he started to pet Dark Shadow, who was now nuzzling the boy, making him giggle more. A giant wave of relief flooded the room as everyone, including Tokoyami, instantly relaxed as Aizu continued to play with Dark Shadow as if it were an oversized dog. This is definitely not what anybody had expected to happen, especially with how skittish and shy the child was upon first meeting them. He was already making great progress by willingly interacting with others, and now, he's even started to become well acquainted with the sentient shadow creature of the one person that everyone thought he would openly try to avoid due to Tokoyami's serious and reserved disposition. The boy was full of surprises. Aizu was so distracted by the playful shadow creature that he didn't notice another student standing beside the avian teen. Said student happened to be Mezu Shuji, a friend of Tokoyami and a fellow hero in training. Shuji used one of his tentacles to form a mouth which hovered near the shorter teen. Well, at least he seems to get along well with Dark Shadow. It could have been way worse, huh? Tokoyami hummed in agreement while he and Shuji watched the child and Dark Shadow carefully. But the moment Aizu noticed Shuji standing there and glanced up at him, that was when all hell broke loose, which nobody, not even Shuji himself, saw coming. The child froze with a sharp gasp, and his eyes grew so huge that they looked like they were about to pop out of his head. And then, Aya! The scream was so ear-piercing and jarring that even Dark Shadow flinched and cowered away from the sudden shriek. The child's terror-filled scream echoed throughout the entire common area and quickly turned into heart-wrenching sobs and wails. Aizu attempted to cover his face with his hands, but the overwhelming fear and anxiety coursing through him made it to where he was trembling so hard he could hardly move his arms, let alone his entire body. Shuji carefully approached the visibly frightened boy and crouched down in front of him. Hey, it's okay, little guy. Don't be scared." He then proceeded to reach a hand out to the child. It was then that things turned real ugly real quick. "No! Oh, stuff. Get away from me. Get away!" Aizu screamed before scrambling backwards in an attempt to get away from the now confused teen. The boy began to cry and sob uncontrollably while curling up into a tight ball on the floor. He covered his head with his arms and was trembling so hard it looked like he was vibrating. "Aizu! What's wrong, Aizu? What is it?" Nijire cried out before falling to her knees next to the boy. She wanted to pull him into a hug, but was afraid of making things worse by doing so, but she couldn't just leave him like this. For once, she was at a loss on what to do and how to make things better. The boy didn't seem to hear a word she, or anybody else for that matter, said as he then started to mutter incoherently to himself while he continued to scream and wail. He was sobbing and crying so hard that he was actually gasping for air. The words were a jumbled mess, but the students did manage to pick up a few words that made their stomachs sink with horror. And no, please stop it. Not Nomu. Any sub anything but Nomu. Nomu is esi scary animin. Peel please, please, don't hurt me. I'll be good, I promise I'll be good. I'm a good boy. Ilho listen and be good. Please, don't gasp, don't kill me. The whole room was dead silent aside from the choking sobbing sounds coming from the terrified little boy. The tension in the room was so thick and heavy it was almost suffocating, and it seemed as though everyone was thinking the same thing. Why would Aizu associate Shuji, a fellow UA student, with a Nomu? And for that matter, how in the world does a child know what a nomu is? Everyone was speechless, simply speechless. If it weren't for the fact that everyone in Class 1A was attacked by the League of Villains at the USJ, where several highly dangerous villains and even a freaking Nomu tried to kill them, then they would be questioning what the boy was going on about. But the fact that he's begging not to be hurt or killed by a Nomu, something that could only be associated with the League, that was enough to make their skin crawl. It wasn't until they all saw and heard Aizu hyperventilating in between gasping sobs that Nijire finally pulled herself out of her stupor and proceeded to gently pull the boy into her lap, which only seemed to cause him to panic even more. But she refused to let him go and managed to hug him close to her chest while Aizu continued to cry. Aizu buried his face into her chest, smearing his tears and snot all over Nijire's uniform, not that she minded, while clutching onto her for dear life, as if afraid of her letting go. Nijire had to fight back the knot forming in her throat, as well as the urge to cry, as she cooed gently at the boy and stroked his back. Shushu, it's okay, Aizu. It's okay, don't cry, sweetie. Breathe for me. Nice, slow, deep breaths. Everything's okay, Zuzu, you're okay? She did her best to calm Aizu down, but it seemed like nothing she said or did was working. Eri and the others were speechless while watching the heartbreaking scene, some of them covering their mouths with their hands and others clinging onto one another for support. As for Shuji, all he could do was stand there watching the boy who he had unintentionally terrified, who had just referred to him as a Nomu. He wasn't offended or upset by it. He knew that his appearance was something that would often scare little kids, but it was the mere fact that a little boy like Aizu knew what a Nomu was and that he'd compared someone like Shuji to one that made his stomach twist uncomfortably. The League of Villains were the only other known villain organization to have possession of such a terrifying creature, the same creature that almost killed All Might. And for this innocent child to be subjected to such evil, for him to literally beg for his life and to be spared of any pain that would likely befall him at the hands of both the villains and a Nomu, what in the hell have those monsters done to him? What's going on here? Everyone, aside from Nijire and Aizu, jumped at the sudden voice and turned to see their homeroom teacher Mr. Aizawa, also known as Eraserhead, sauntering toward his students, a mildly irritated look on his exhausted face. Would anybody care to explain what all the noise is abo-? He cut himself off upon seeing the display before him, and as soon as he heard the gasping sobs and whimpers coming from the familiar little boy, his irritation quickly turned into immense concern as he rushed over and knelt down beside the girl. What happened? He asked softly while carefully reaching his hand out and gently placing it on the boy's quivering back and slowly rubbing it. The action seemed to help soothe the child despite it coming from someone he would consider a stranger, likely due to the fact that he was in such a vulnerable state and seeking any form of comfort at the moment. Ida, along with Nijire and a couple of other students, gave a brief explanation to the pro-hero, and the moment they mentioned the word Nomu, Aizawa realized just how serious the situation truly was. The day Aizu arrived at UA, he and the rest of the teaching staff were given a short rundown of the boy's situation by both Nedzu and Tsukachi. While he may come off as strict, impatient, and downright unkind, Aizawa has always had a soft spot for young children, especially those who have become victims of abuse. It wasn't even the fact that this child was most definitely abused by villains that made his blood boil and his stomach twist, but rather the fact that he was not only a captive of the League of Villains, the same villains that attacked him and his students during training at the USJ, but he also somehow came into contact with the monstrous creature known as Nomu. He recalled back to when he had nearly been crushed to death by the Nomu, but not before having his whole elbow decomposed by the League's leader, Shigaraki. Just that thought alone was enough to make him take the child's ordeal very seriously. The relatively heavy atmosphere was only made worse when the familiar loud and booming voice of none other than Katsuki Bakugu rang throughout the common area, grabbing the attention of everyone in the room. What the hell is with all the damn yelling, huh? He bellowed while descending down the stairs and into the living area. I can hardly concentrate on this stupid English assignment with all the crying and shit. He paused when he saw some of his classmates, their homeroom teacher and another student who he didn't recognize huddled in a group. As he came closer, he then spotted little Aizu cowering against Nijire and continuing to cry. Bakugu's brow twitched. So, It's that brat that's been making all this damn noise. Who the hell is he, anyway, and what the hell is he doing here, huh? His angry barking seemed to only frighten the child even more, which earned him an angry glare from his classmates, but he didn't seem to understand or even care. Bakugo, keep it down, will you? If there's anyone in here who needs to stop yelling, it would probably be you, another student, Shudo Todoroki, retorted in a more calm voice as he too came downstairs to see what the commotion was all about. Bakugo merely scoffed at the comment. Nobody asked for your opinion, Icy Hot. Aizawa shot the blonde a glare before turning his attention back to the child, who was shivering like a leaf. He forced himself to remain calm and ignore his student's disregard for the boy, and instead focused on tending to the frightened child. Hadu, take Aizu somewhere he can calm down. The courtyard would probably be best. I need to have a word with my students. It'll only be a moment. Nijire nodded without a word and proceeded to cradle Aizu in her arms before standing up and heading for the courtyard, his backpack long forgotten in the foyer. He began to whimper in protest before Nijire gently shushed him. Come on, sweetheart. She cooed softly. Let's go have some quiet time, okay? It'll make you feel better. As soon as she and Aizu were out of sight and earshot, Aizawa turned to his students, shooting the angry blonde one more glare before returning his attention to the students. Everyone listen up. I know you're all probably wondering what's been going on in regards to Aizu. Now, I'm not supposed to divulge this information to anyone outside of the investigation team, but after hearing what's happened just now, and given the fact that it involves the League of Villains and the Nomu, he gave a quick glance to Shuji, who he couldn't help but he bad for, before continuing. I feel that it is best that you all should be aware of what's going on with him. Now, what I am about to disclose to you is very confidential and is to only be kept between us. Nobody is to tell any other person about this unless it is myself or another teacher. I will take responsibility in telling you all this and inform the principal myself. Is that clear? Everyone, including Bakugo, who was still irritated, nodded in response. With that, Aizawa told everyone as much about Aizu and his ties to the two villain factions and the mission in which he was rescued from their clutches as he could. He also told them about how one of the members of UA's Big Three had been put in charge of taking care of him until the threat has been extinguished or his family has come to claim him. After less than 5 minutes, the whole room was deafeningly silent and filled with even more crushing tension than before, and the look on everyone's face spoke volumes. No way. This has to be a joke. I knew that the League was messed up and all, but, damn it, how evil and twisted can someone actually be? And to a child, it's easy to forget that, despite the number of pros out there, we still live in such a messed up world. It's simply awful. He looks so young too. Who the hell keeps a small kid locked away like that? I had a hunch that he's had a rough upbringing, but I can't even begin to imagine what he's been through. Even those who didn't voice their concerns, including Todoroki, appeared to be thinking the same thing. Even Bakugo, despite his angry annoyance from earlier, couldn't help but grimace at what he's been told. Mr. Aizawa, Eri cried out. Please, sir, isn't there anything we can do? Any way that we can help? The man gazed at the girl who was obviously heartbroken by the situation, as were some of the others. His eyes softened. As of right now, the investigation is still ongoing. While we know who the perpetrators are, that still doesn't mean it'll be easy to take them down. I'm sorry to say this, but I'm afraid that there's really nothing any of you can do right now. Even if there was, I wouldn't let any of you be a part of it. Before any of the students could retort in protest, he held up a hand to silence them before continuing. Taking into account the previous incident involving the League, I will not risk having any of you join in on this case. You're all still students, and you don't have enough combat experience to do anything yet. So for now, all you need to focus on is your training and regular class schedules. He could see the dejected looks on everyone's faces, well, almost everyone, and decided to give them some peace of mind since he knew that they weren't just going to let this go. However, they all returned their attention to the teacher. If you still insist on helping out, I'll allow you to assist Tagada and Hadu with looking after Aizu and making sure he's taken care of. Now keep in mind, this doesn't exempt you from your class obligations, but in your own time, or if given permission by me or another teacher, you're more than welcome to help out with looking after the kid. That seemed to do the trick in making everyone feel better as they all nodded their heads eagerly, aside from a few, including Bakugo and Shuji. Alright, you're all dismissed. Shuji, I need you to come with me. The teen nodded silently before following his teacher towards the courtyard, but not before they were followed by Eri, Uraraka, Mina and Yaoyorozu. Outside in the rectangle-shaped courtyard, sitting on one of the stone benches was Nijire with little Aizu sitting in her lap, cradled in her arms while she softly cooed at him and stroked his arm lovingly. The child wasn't crying anymore, or at least not as loudly, as he rested his head against the girl's chest with his little hand clutched to her vest. Something told Aizawa that Nijire would make an excellent mother someday. Aizawa cautiously approached the two with careful and precise movements until he was sitting down beside them. "How is he?" he asked calmly. "He's a little better, still shaken up, but he's stopped crying at least," she responded with a sad smile, her hand coming up to stroke his curly hair. She then turned to face the man with sympathy in her eyes. "I'm so sorry to have caused so much trouble. If I had known this would happen, It's okay." Aizawa interrupted. "It's not your fault. None of us could have known that this would happen, so don't blame yourself." He then lowered his gaze to look at Aizu, who was staring at him with a bit of hesitance and fear. His poor face was red, blotchy and tear-stained, and his brilliant green eyes were puffy and bloodshot. He offered the child a soft smile. "Hey there, kid. You feeling okay?" Aizu was silent for a moment. He looked around and noticed Eri and a few of the girls standing near the doorway, and he even saw Shuji standing beside them before he returned his attention to the teacher and silently nodded his head. "That's good. I was told about what happened. Sorry you had to go through that." He then turned and gestured for Shuji to come over, which he did, taking a few steps towards Aizu and Nijire before stopping about 1.5 meters away. "You remember Shuji?" Aizawa asked softly. Aizu glanced up at the teen who gave him a friendly wave, and despite most of his face being obscured by the mask, it looked as though he were smiling with his eyes. Aizu nodded, appearing more anxious now that the teen was present. Aizawa cleared his throat and continued. "Well, he's one of my students, and while I understand what caused you to be so startled, I can assure you that he's not a Nomu. He's a student who's training to become a hero, just like everyone else here." "That's right, Aizu." Aizawa and Shuji turned and saw Eri quickly coming over to vouch for her fellow classmate, a bright smile on her pale face. "Shuji is really nice and sweet. He's probably one of the sweetest people in our class." Just then, the other girls came over and voiced their opinions as well. "Yeah, he may look really scary, but Shuji's really friendly and is super nice," Uraraka stated. Mina nodded and said, "It's true. He's real sweet and gentle, and he wouldn't hurt a fly. Well, unless that fly happened to be a villain that was hurting people, but other than that, Shuji is such a sweet guy who's always willing to help others." Aizawa nodded his head in agreement with his students before speaking again. "I don't know what all you went through while in captivity, Aizu, but I can assure you that not a single person here will hurt you. Our job, as both pro-heroes and heroes in training, is to protect people, and that includes you. So," he gestured to Shuji again. "Do you want to try and say hello to Shuji?" They all waited with anxious anticipation for the boy's response. He sniffled while looking back between Aizawa and Shuji, and even glanced at the girls and Nijire, as if he were trying to get their approval on the man's proposal. He then looked up at Shuji himself, who tilted his head and gave him that same look that made it seem as though his eyes were smiling. After what felt like an eternity, Aizu silently wiggled out of Nijire's grasp, and with his hands wringing nervously together he ever so slowly began to walk over to Shuji. Shuji knelt down to the boy's level, although there was still a major height difference between the two, and he didn't say anything. He patiently waited for Aizu to come to him rather than trying to coax him into coming forward, and for a moment, it looked like he was about to do so as he slowly and steadily came closer. But then, a flash of fear overwhelmed him, and he instantly turned around and went back to where Nijire was sitting and climbed into her lap, a tiny whimper leaving his lips as he buried his face into her shoulder. "I'm sorry," Aizu whispered, guilt and shame prominent on his little face and in his voice. No, it's okay," Aizawa assured gently while rubbing his hand over the boy's arm in a comforting motion. "These things take time. There's no need to rush, and there's also no need to feel bad. Shuji nodded in agreement. He's right. I'm not mad or upset. If anything, I feel really terrible that this happened. As I said, this isn't something any of us could have seen coming, regardless of the circumstances, Aizawa explained while continuing to stroke the boy's arm with the tips of his fingers. We'll give him some time to adjust, and once he's more comfortable, maybe he'll want to try and talk to you again. Shuji nodded before bowing his head and taking his leave. Should we call Mirio and tell him about this? Nijire asked curiously. Aizawa shook his head. No, that wouldn't be a good idea at the moment. We'll wait until he gets back to do so. I'll be the one to inform him of the incident, but in the meantime, you're both welcome to stick around until he gets back. Nijire smiled and nodded before getting back up with Aizu in her arms. Then, the girls looked at one another before sharing a knowing look and then turning to the boy. Hey Aizu. Mina chirped. You want to meet Kuda's bunny? He's super cute and soft. Aizu's eyes widened at the mention of meeting a real-life bunny and he nodded his head. With that, Nijire and the other girls took Aizu back inside the dorm, leaving Aizawa alone with nothing but his own thoughts. He rubbed his temple as he could feel a headache beginning to stir, an irritated sigh leaving his lips. Definitely not how I wanted to spend my evening. It was almost 6:30 by the time Mirio finally returned to UA. He was informed by Nijire that she had taken Aizu to the Class 1A Heights Alliance so he could meet the rest of the class, so he made a beeline straight for the freshman dorm buildings and continued walking around until he found the right place. Upon entering the dorm, he was greeted by an adorable sight. Aizu was sitting on the floor in the living room surrounded by a few students, including Nijire, and a small white bunny was sitting in his lap, reaching up to sniff the child's face with its twitching bunny nose and making him giggle. Hee, it tickles? Aizu laughed and snuggled the fluffy bunny. Other students who were sitting in the dining area either helping each other with making dinner or were simply watching the boy with a tender gaze. Even Shuji, who was sitting in the dining area with Tokoyami, couldn't help but smile at the sweet interaction between Aizu and Kuda's pet bunny. Kirishima was the first one to notice Mirio standing in the foyer and came over to greet him with a big smile. Hey man. Good to see you again. The redhead chirped. Here to pick up the little dude? Mirio nodded with a friendly smile as he proceeded to walk into the living room. The moment Aizu saw the blonde teen walking towards him, his face instantly lit up like a light bulb. Mirio, he exclaimed happily as he allowed the bunny to hop out of his lap and immediately ran over to the teen with a big smile on his face. Miri, you're back. Mirio chuckled and bent down to lift the child into his arms, cuddling him close to his chest. Ah, it's good to see you again, Aizu. Did you have a good time with your big sister and everyone else? Aizu nodded with a beaming smile as he began to tell Mirio all about his day. Meanwhile, the others were watching the tender, loving scene with adoration. They knew that Mirio and Aizu were close, but it was completely different actually getting to see the two like this. They could tell just how much the two cared for each other. Well, almost all of them. Bakugo was sitting on one of the couches by himself watching TV. He looked as though he couldn't care less about the little boy, although every once in a while he would spare a small glance here and there, only to return his attention to his show. Okay, Squirt, you go and collect your things and then we can get going. Just a moment, Tagata. Mirio turned to the voice that called his name and saw Aizawa walking towards him. There's something I need to talk to you about before you go. It's actually pretty important. He raised a brow to the man, confused as to what the man wanted to talk to him about. The two hardly ever spoke, and on the rare occasion that they did it was only a couple of words, and it was usually in passing. But he didn't question the man and simply nodded before turning to his friend who was helping Aizu with putting on his backpack. Nijire, I'm gonna be a moment. Would you mind going on ahead of me? She nodded and offered her hand to Aizu, but the boy looked at the teen with a worried look on his face. Mirio gave him a reassuring smile and said, Don't worry, Aizu, it'll only be for a moment. Promise. He held out his pinky to the boy who smiled widely and did the same, wrapping his smaller pinky around the teen's. Pinky promise, Miri. Mirio watched Aizu and Nijire exit the building before turning to face the erasure hero with a look of concern. Is everything okay? Did something happen while I was gone? He was almost afraid to ask, knowing his luck. The look on the man's face only confirmed his suspicions. "I'm afraid that Aizu had suffered a panic attack," he explained in a flat but serious tone. Mirio's eyes widened at the news. What? What do you mean?" Aizawa sighed. "I wasn't here when it initially started, but according to what some of my students and Haru told me, one of my other students tried to approach him and, well, he freaked out thinking that Shuji was a Nomu. He wouldn't stop screaming and crying." Mirio felt his heart sink into his stomach and his stomach sink to his feet. "What?" Aizawa's face softened and he looked at the teen with sympathy in his dark and tired eyes. "Luckily, we were able to help him calm down, but taking into account the seriousness of his case and the fact that this is most definitely the work of the League of Villains, I have a feeling there's more to this whole thing than we first suspected." Aizawa placed a comforting hand on the teen's shoulder. "Don't worry. I've already informed the principal of this incident. He's going to have Tsukachi look into this, and he'll likely come by to gather statements from the students to help him along." Mirio nodded slowly, looking dejected. "I understand, but unfortunately, all he could think about was his own failures as both a caretaker and as a hero in training. This is my fault. I should have been there for him. Even if it was my work study, I should have made an excuse and insist on staying with Aizu. No, what am I thinking? What difference would my being there have made? It's not like I could have prevented Aizu's panic attack. Hell, I wasn't even able to prevent him from being taken by villains. Hey," Aizawa said, Guile clapping his hand over the teen's shoulder. He must have noticed the gears turning in Mirio's head and the look on his face. "Try not to think about it too much. This isn't something you should be blaming yourself for. There's nothing we can do about it at the moment. All we can do for now is try to help him any way we can, and now that I have a better understanding of the kid's circumstances, I can assist you and the investigation team if need be." Mirio smiled at the man's words, despite his lingering doubts. I really appreciate it, sir." "Thank you." The man nodded, a light smirk playing on his lips. "Not a problem." "Huh, okay, settle down. Let me rinse you off, silly. Don't want you running around with suds in your hair, do you?" Aizu was giggling like crazy while he sat on the small stool and felt the splash of warm water cascade over his body, rinsing off the soap from his hair and skin. The boy had finished his dinner and completed his homework sheets a short while after the two had returned from Class 1 as dorm. Mirio didn't want to think about Aizawa's words too much, especially while Aizu was around, but it was very difficult to think about anything else. "There you go. All clean," Mirio chanted. "Now let's get you dried off and dressed in warm jammies so we can get you to bed." He ushered the boy out of the stalls and wrapped him in a fuzzy white towel before drying his hair and body off. His wild mane of green curls even more wild after being freed of water droplets. Mirio chose to dress the boy in one of his all-might onesies, which Aizu didn't seem to mind. Afterward, the two made their way out of the washroom and up the stairs until they reached Aizu's bedroom. Aizu climbed onto the bed and crawled under the sheets, snuggling against the plush pillow and cuddling his favorite bunny toy. Mirio smiled tenderly as he sat down beside the boy and carded his fingers through his hair. "Aizu," he brought his hand from the child's freshly washed curls down to his freckle-kissed cheek, his hand resting there and stroking the skin with his thumb. Aizu nodded his head in response. The teen's smile faltered a bit, but he refused to allow it to turn into a frown. He had to be strong, for Aizu. "Aizawa-sensei told me that one of his students had accidentally scared you. He said that you thought he was a Nomo?" He saw the boy's eyes widen ever so slightly before he lowered his head to avert his gaze. He then nodded. Shifting slightly on the bed so he was sitting closer to the boy, Mirio brought his other hand out and cupped it over Aizu's other cheek, gently forcing him to look up at him. "Are you okay?" Mirio whispered softly while his thumb stroked the boy's cheek. He could see Aizu's eyes filling up with tears. He croaked. "I tried to be brave. I wanted to try to be good and make new friends, but I am sorry." A soft sob left the boy's lips as he tried to pull himself out of Mirio's tender hold, which broke Mirio's heart. He pulled the boy into his lap and held him close. Aizu was no longer able to hold in his sadness and he began to silently cry into Mirio's chest. The teen gently shushed the boy while cradling him in his arms. "Don't be sorry, Aizu. You did such a good job being so brave, and I'm so proud of you for trying. Aizu lifted his head just enough to glance up at the teen. His eyes glazed with tears. Really? He asked tentatively. Mirio smiled down at the little boy and nodded. Really? Aizu managed to smile a tiny bit and snuggled into Mirio's chest. The teen hugged the boy tightly, and he simply sat there holding the tiny child close and basking in the peaceful quiet. After nearly 5 minutes of the two boys hugging each other and basking in their shared warmth, Mirio pressed a loving kiss to Aizu's cheek before tucking him back under the thick covers and wishing him a good night. But as he went to leave, he was stopped when Aizu said, "Can I see them again?" Mirio turned back around to face the child, confused for a moment before he realized what he was saying. "You mean, Class 1A?" he asked. Aizu nodded. "You want to see them again?" Another nod. I was scared at first. I was afraid that they would be mean to me, 'cause Shigaraki told me that heroes wouldn't care for someone like me. That part made Mirio's blood boil, but he kept his anger in check and listened to the boy. "But I want to try. I want to try and be brave and make lots of friends. And he clutched his tiny fist to his chest and looked at Mirio with unwavering determination sparkling in his large green eyes. "I want to get to know them better. They seem really nice, and I want to see them again if I can." Mirio felt his heart warm at the child's gentle honesty and kind nature. He felt as though a flame had been lit inside of him upon seeing the unwavering tenacity on the boy's face. "I'm sure we can make that work. I don't see why not, and I can tell that they all really liked you. You may have already made tons of friends, Aizu," he assured. Aizu smiled brightly before settling under the covers and closing his eyes. Mirio made sure the fairy lights were turned on before gently closing the door behind him while also leaving it cracked a tiny bit. He then made his way back downstairs to join his other classmates, but as he descended down the stairs, he began to reflect over everything that's happened within the last few days that have led to this point, all while solidifying the promise he made to himself. He's trying. It's hard right now, he's had a few hiccups here and there, but he's at least trying. That's all I can ask of him to do is try. No matter what, no matter how long it takes, even if it takes me my entire life, I won't give up on trying to make him feel safe and loved. I'm going to give the best life he could ever want and ask for, and I swear, one day, I will make those bastards pay for what they've done. How the hell can you be so damn calm at a time like this? Those bastards raided and destroyed one of our main meet-up spots that you said was safe from the police, and they detained several of my Nomo. Not to mention, they also took my pet. How can you not be upset about this?" A loud, shrill voice belonging to a very irate and irritated Shigaraki pierced through the relative silence of the dimly lit bar of the League's hideout. Overhaul sat at one of the bar stools with an unfazed look on his face. He wasn't wearing his plague mask and was instead donning a simple black sick mask. "Who says I'm not upset?" Overhaul inquired calmly. "You really think I wouldn't be angered by those filthy rats coming into my home all willy-nilly and stealing what's ours?" Shigaraki glared at the man. "None of this would have happened if you had gagged that brat and locked him up somewhere where nobody could find him. Now what will happen to our plan, huh?" "Shigaraki, please calm yourself. You shouldn't say such things to a guest," Kurojiri warned from behind the bar. But that didn't stop the man from hissing venomously at the Yakuza leader. "Now that our main source of that stupid quirk-canceling drug is gone and over half of our men have been taken in by police, how are we supposed to continue this operation without him? Do you really expect me to want to keep working with you after all that's happened?" Overhauled gazed at him with disinterest and slight boredom. "I don't expect you to do anything but be patient. Yes, we've lost the source of my quirk-canceling drugs and bullets, but that doesn't mean all is lost." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small red capsule. "This right here is only a small sample, but it is enough for me to work with until we can get Aizu back." Shigaraki raised a brow in confusion. "And what the hell is that supposed to be?" "This right here is what I'll be working with in order to create a more potent and longer-lasting quirk inhibitor. While we no longer have our main source for the drug, that doesn't mean I can't use what we already have." He stuck the capsule back into his pocket while keeping his hand there. "It'll take some time, more time than it did before, but once I've successfully patented the effects of both drugs to where they'll last indefinitely, we'll finally be able to bring the Yakuza back from the brink of extinction, and you'll finally have a means to make your army stronger than ever." Shigaraki still looked skeptical, unsure if he wanted to go along with what Overhaul was trying to do. He then turned to face a static-covered screen and said, "Well, what do you think, Master?" Just then, the sound of an older man whose voice was slightly distorted replied, "Allow him to do what needs to be done. Don't let this setback discourage you, Tamura. Remember what I've told you. If you make a mistake, dust yourself off and try again. Keep going until you've achieved your goals. Besides, it would be a real shame if we were to lose someone as capable and dedicated as Overhaul. He could be a real asset to you. And also, you've still got All Might to worry about." After a few seconds of thinking it over, Shigaraki hummed in response to his master's advice as he looked back to Overhaul and said begrudgingly, "Fine. I'll let you continue with your little experiments, but only if you keep up with your end of the deal and give me my share." Overhaul chuckled. "Of course, my friend. Like I said, I would never dream of cheating you like that. I am a man of integrity, after all." He then got up from his seat and proceeded to exit the bar. Just before he left, he said, "I'll contact you again when I've made progress with the tests, and in the meantime, continue to do like what we've been doing and try to keep your hands clean." He turned to look over his shoulder and smirked. "Oh, and I'll be sure to inform you if I or any of my subordinates find out Aiza's location. He is our pet, after all, and lost pets should always be returned to their owners." The Sunday after the incident with Aiza meeting the rest of 1A and having a panic attack upon meeting Shuji and mistaking him for a Nomu, something that was still sickening to think of, Mirio was called in by Nedzu for an important meeting in regards to said incident. He was also asked to bring little Aizu along with him, which the child didn't seem to mind at all. Upon arriving at the faculty conference room, Mirio was slightly surprised to find not only the principal waiting for him, but also Mami, Tsukachi and even Aizawa, who had stated before that he would also be part of the investigation by providing information on the League. After plopping Aiza down in the seat beside him and helping the boy unpack a coloring book and a box of crayons to keep him occupied, Mirio turned his gaze to Nedzu, who offered him a fond smile. "I appreciate you for taking time out of your day off to come here, Tagata. I was informed by Mr. Aizawa about the incident that had occurred a couple of days ago." He drew his gaze to the child who was doodling on one of the sheets of paper before he felt eyes on him and anxiously glanced up at the animal. Nedzu smiled gently at the boy. "I'm terribly sorry you had to go through that, Aizu. I'm very glad to see you're doing so well, at least." Aizu seemed pleased by the animal's words and went back to his drawing. Nedzu then turned to Tsukachi, who nodded his head and shuffled through some documents before clearing his throat and speaking. "I've gathered as much intel and data on the Nomu as I could after the latest incident. Though it's not very much, and unfortunately, we still haven't been able to find anything on the boy as far as his medical records or family history." Mirio frowned at this, slightly disappointed, but perked up when he heard the man say, "However, despite this, I think we may be able to gather some very useful information out of this latest incident, and Aizu is going to be helping us with that." He gestured to the boy who had glanced up upon hearing his name. Mirio raised a brow while placing a hand on the boy's back. "What do you mean?" Tsukachi smiled at the boy before shuffling through more forms. "Despite the circumstances, I believe Aizu may have some valuable information about the villains that could help us with not only finding out more about him and his past, but it could also help us with tracking down the villain's hideout. While the compound where the Shai Hasaikai and the League of Villains seemed promising, I don't think that was their only hideout. Knowing the Yakuza, they likely have multiple hideouts hidden in plain sight where they're carrying out their evil plans." Mirio nodded his head, processing everything that's been said. "I see. So, you're saying that Aiza's outburst about the Nomu may help to figure out when he was kidnapped and when they started making these monsters." Tsukachi nodded with a big grin. "Exactly. We're hoping to gather as much intel as we can by asking Aiza questions on what he knows about the villains, and with Miss Takahara's assistance, we may be able to do so without causing him too much distress." Mirio glanced down at Aizu, who was humming happily to himself while coloring a picture of a dog in his coloring book. Feeling his heart swell and a smile spread over his face at the endearing, heartwarming sight, Mirio looked back to the detective. "But if it'll help you out with the case, then it's fine by me. When did you want to start?" "Well, right away if possible. I'd already gathered statements from Mr. Aizawa's students, including Shuji, and it would be best to get any information we can from Aizu while it's still fresh." He gathered all his documents and placed them back in a manila envelope. "If it's not too much trouble, of course," he added with a grin. Mirio huffed out a chuckle. "No, it's not. It's not like we have anything better to do." He patted Aizu's hair. "Whatever you have to do to help Aizu, I don't mind at all." While he was smiling cheerfully on the outside, he couldn't help the anxious, nervous feeling twisting in his gut. Afterward, Aizu was led to one of the empty classrooms with Tsukachi and Mami sitting beside each other and across from the boy. On one of the desks was a small stack of drawing papers and a small tub of crayons and markers. The detective explained that for some children, it's easier for them to better explain something by drawing or writing it out, and for someone like Aizu, he seemed like the type of kid who was a visual learner. Waiting in the hallway outside the classroom, Mirio stood next to Aizawa, who chose to wait alongside the teen to keep him company. It wasn't like he had anything else to do other than return to his office and grade papers. Tsukachi was careful with each question he asked while also making sure the child understood what was being asked. His questions ranged from, "Do you remember what the villain's hideout looked like on the inside?" to, "Do you recall the villain's quirks and abilities?" and other questions like that. For the most part, Aizu was doing very well with answering each question to the best of his knowledge, and he even took the time to draw out various pictures depicting each scenario he'd experienced. He didn't seem too nervous or scared, and Tsukachi was honestly impressed with how much Aizu remembered and recounted. It was also thanks to his quirk, which allowed him to tell if someone was lying or telling the truth, that he was able to tell if what Aizu was saying was the truth, which in this case, he was kind of sad to say was the case. After nearly 20 minutes, Tsukachi decided that he'd gotten what he needed and was very satisfied with the child's cooperation. "Thank you so much for talking with me, Aizu," he stated with a kind smile, his hand held out to the boy for him to shake, which he did. "You've been such a big help. I promise we'll do what we can to put these guys away for a long time so they can't hurt anybody else ever again." Aizu grinned despite all that he's just admitted. It was no surprise that it was very hard for the boy to recount all of the cruel and disgusting things he was forced into, and Tsukachi wasn't looking forward to telling Mirio, but he knew there was no avoiding it. He thanked Mami for her help, to which she stated that it was a pleasure working with him, before taking her leave. He and Aizu exited the classroom and found Mirio and Aizawa waiting for them. Upon seeing the teen, Aizu quickly ran over to him and hugged him around his legs. Mirio smiled brightly before crouching down and scooping the boy in his arms. "Hey there, buddy. You okay?" Aizu nodded with his face pressed into the crook of Mirio's neck. Mirio turned to the detective and asked, "So? What were you able to find out?" His voice sounded a bit hesitant, like part of him didn't want to know. Tsukachi sighed while scratching at his chin, the small stack of drawings clutched into his hand. "I'm honestly surprised with how much he knows and was able to tell me. He's very bright and intelligent for a boy his age, which Miss Takahara was able to vouch for. Thanks to him, I was able to gather quite a bit of intel which I'll be using for the case." He then shuffled the papers into a neat stack before stuffing them into his briefcase along with a folder full of important documents. He couldn't bring himself to show the teen such drawings just yet. "I'll keep you updated on any new changes to the investigation, and don't worry," he placed a hand on the teen's shoulder. "We're not giving up on finding out more about Aizu. It may take a while, but I promise you will find something." Mirio smiled understandingly at the man. "I know. I really appreciate everything you've done." After that, they all went their separate ways, with Aizawa assuring him that he could come to him if he needed anything. Mirio was thankful for that. While making his way back to their dorm with Aizu's hand clutched in his own, Mirio glanced down at Aizu and said with a cheerful smile, "I'm so proud of you, Aizu. You were so brave and such a good boy." The boy looked up and stared at the teen in awe. "I was." Mirio nodded. This pleased Aizu immensely as he began to swing their linked hands back and forth while humming happily. Mirio laughed softly. "In fact, you were so brave and good that I think you deserve a reward. How does pudding sound? Aizu tilted his head in slight confusion. What's pudding? Mirio's smiling grew wider. It's a type of thick custard that's a bit cold, but it's super sweet and yummy. It's kinda like ice cream. Aizu's eyes looked like giant sparkling emerald jewels at the sound of eating a brand new tasty treat as he smiled with glee. Pudding! Pudding! I want to try pudding! With a hearty laugh, Mirio scooped the boy off the ground, making the boy squeal with joy, and placed him on his shoulders and began marching towards their dorm building with Aizu holding onto his hair and laughing cheerfully. Alright, pudding it is. And then maybe, if Principal Nedzu says it's okay to, I'll even take you to the park down the street. Aizu asked what a park was, to which Mirio was happy to explain, and that made the boy's excitement even more apparent as he proceeded to skip ahead while singing, Pudding at the park! Pudding at the park! This made Mirio's heart flutter with happiness. It truly was the little things that mattered most, and nothing was too mediocre for his little brother. The following Monday started like any other day, but with a surprise around lunchtime. Rather than Aizu having lunch in his class with Mirio and his friends joining him, he asked if he could join them for lunch in the cafeteria. Mirio hadn't expected the boy to want to spend their lunch hour in a place where hundreds of students would be surrounding him. Perhaps this was his way of trying to step out of his comfort zone, which Mirio was very happy with. Taking the boy's hand into his, he led Aizu down the hall towards Lunch Rush Cafeteria with Nijire and Tamaki walking alongside them. When they arrived, Aizu looked a bit overwhelmed at first, but did his best to stay calm even as he was led to a vacant table. Mirio offered to stay with Aizu while his friends went to grab their food, and once they returned, Mirio got up to do the same. He even got a small bowl of katsudon for Aizu even though he'd packed him a bento box like usual. As the group enjoys their lunch while talking about various topics on their classes and certain assignments, Aizu takes in everything around him while gazing at all of the different students congregating the cafeteria. He seems to be more relaxed now that he's gotten to see what lunchtime with the big kids is like, and while he still doesn't seem to want to leave Mirio's side, it does make the teen happy to see that Aizu's at least making an effort to open up more. One day at a time. Just then, a voice called out to Aizu, causing Mirio and his friends to turn to the source of the voice. To Mirio's surprise and Aizu's delight, it's Mina Ishido and some of her classmates. From Class 1A. Hey Aizu! She greeted cheerfully before coming over with her tray of food. Trailing behind her were Kirishima, Kaminari, Siro, and even Eri. What a surprise! I haven't seen you here before. Did you decide to come have lunch in the cafeteria? She asked curiously. Aizu, while staring up at the pink girl, nodded his head with a mouthful of katsudon. Eri smiled and said, I'm glad to see that you're doing all right, Aizu. Yeah. Kirishima chimed in. You really had us scared there for a minute. Glad to see you doing better, little dude. He gave a thumbs up after this, which seemed to make Aizu smile. He then patted the seat next to him. Mirio then voiced Aizu's request by saying, I think he wants you guys to join us for lunch. They all smiled and happily obliged before sitting in the vacant chairs along the table. Eri and Mina were sitting beside Aizu while Kirishima, Kaminari and Siro sat beside Tamaki and Nijire. Oh hey look, it's Bakugu! Kaminari exclaimed as he and the others spotted the blonde teen walking in their direction. The look on his face was a mix of irritation and disinterest. Hey dude, wanna come and sit with us? Aizu's here. Kirishima called out while gesturing for him to come join them. Bakugu turned to look towards the group of students and noticed little Aizu gazing at him with a mix of curiosity and slight nervousness in his eyes. He scoffed and walked away without even turning to look back. While the students were disappointed, they understood that this was just how the blonde was. They noticed the hurt look on Aizu's face and proceeded to try and comfort him. Hey, don't worry about it, little guy. Kirishima assured him with a kind smile. Bakugu can be a bit of a jerk sometimes, but he's actually a pretty cool guy to hang around. It just takes some time for him to warm up to others, so try not to let it get to you, okay? The others, minus the big three, nodded in agreement. Yeah. Siro added. He may be a total grump and a bit rough around the edges, but he's super smart and can be really loyal. He also has an amazing quirk. This caught Aizu's attention as he straightened up and asked, what is his quirk? Beaming with delight, Kirishima explained. He can use his own sweat to create powerful explosions. He can use them for all kinds of things, and he can even make himself fly with them. It's actually pretty badass and so manly. Aizu's eyes were practically sparkling. He then began to ask them about their quirks, his curiosity and interest in quirks shining through. And of course, they all happily obliged. I can make my whole body harden like rock, which is super useful for being a human shield. I think it's really manly and awesome. My quirk allows me to produce acid from my pores, which can be both corrosive and non-corrosive. I can control its viscosity, too. But I have to be careful with it, or else it can eat through my clothes, which is so uncool. I'm able to shoot cellophane tape-like strips from my elbows, which kinda look like tape dispensers. I know, they're kinda weird-looking, hee. I can produce electricity from my body and expel it in all different directions. It's not much, but it does come in handy. My quirk is called Rewind. It basically allows me to accumulate energy, which causes my horn to grow in size. Once it's fully charged, I can reverse anyone back to a previous state, though it can be dangerous if not used properly. Aizu was astonished by the different varieties of quirks and their unique attributes. His hands even looked to be moving in a way that made it look as though he were writing something. Perhaps this was just some sort of tic or habit of his. As for Mirio, he and his friends watched the exchange in relative silence and seemed quite pleased that Aizu was so interested in getting to know these freshmen. Even after the events from the week prior, that didn't stop Aizu from trying to open up to others. At one point, while the students were discussing different things and even Mirio and his friends had joined in on the conversation, Aizu was busy looking around the cafeteria space and checking out all the other students with unique features and trying to figure out what their quirks could be. Most students who noticed the little boy offered a smile and a kind wave while passing him by, many of them even cooing at him and calling him adorable. Just then he let out a tiny gasp when he spotted Shuji sitting at a table a few feet away with Tokoyami and a couple of other students. One of his tentacles formed a mouth which he used to eat his lunch from. He kept a watchful eye on the teen and simply stared at him, paying attention to his movements and gestures. Shuji didn't seem to notice him as he was more focused on whatever discussion he was having with his friends, and part of Aizu wanted to know what they were talking about. Another part of him even wanted to work up the courage to walk over and say hello, but he kept himself glued to his seat. Eri noticed this and followed his gaze till she saw her fellow classmate munching away on a piece of tempura shrimp. She remembered the day he met Shuji and ended up freaking out. She still felt so bad for that and wished there was more she could have done. But it was pointless to continue bringing up the past. What's done was done. But that didn't mean she wanted to leave things the way they were, and so, she came up with an idea. "Hey guys!" She called out to her classmates. This caught the Big Three's attention too. "We have hero combat training after lunch, right? I was thinking, why don't we invite Aizu to come and watch? He would get to see everyone's quirk in action and he could also get to know the others better." The rest of the group seemed to really like that idea. "That's perfect!" Mina exclaimed. "Great idea, Eri-chan." "Hell yeah! We get to show off our awesome new moves to the little dude. What do you think, Aizu? Wanna come sit in on our quirk training class?" Aizu's face and eyes lit up like a light bulb as he turned to Mirio with the biggest grin on his face and asked, "Mirio, can I go and watch? Can I? Please?" Mirio chuckled and said, "Sure, I don't see why not." He ruffled the child's hair playfully. "We'll have to ask Miss Mommy if it's okay, but I'm sure she won't mind." He finished his sentence with a wink, which made Aizu very giddy. The others were ecstatic about getting to have the boy as an audience member, excited about showing the boy their abilities. Turns out, not only was Mommy okay with Aizu sitting in on Class 1 as training period, but Aizawa was also perfectly fine with it. He had actually considered having the boy sit in on his students' training so he could not only get to know the boy better, but so he could get a better read on the boy's thought process and what his mental state was like. Aizu was sitting in a little chair beside the pro hero off to the side of the PE grounds. He was close enough so that he could still see the students training but far enough away so that there was no chance for the boy to get hurt. He had his little backpack resting on the back of the chair and his beloved notebook in his lap. According to Mommy, who wasn't present at the time due to being called in for a brief discussion with Nedzu, Aiza's writing skills had greatly improved after less than a month of working with him, though he still struggles with reading, writing, and understanding most kanji. She's even encouraged him to write in his notebook as often as possible about anything that comes to mind, which he's gladly obliged to. The Class 1A students arrived onto the PE grounds a short while later dressed in their PE attire and then stood in a single file line in front of their teacher. Aizawa walked closer to his students, with Aizu watching and listening carefully as he gave them their instructions on what they were to do. Some of them smiled upon spotting the child and even waved at him. After that, they split up and paired up into groups of 2 before beginning their quirk training. All the while Aizawa stood beside Aizu and kept a close watch on him as he started to write in his notebook while also softly muttering to himself, another habit of his. At one point, the boy had stopped muttering and writing when he spotted Shuji. The teen was sparring with another student who had a large tail protruding from his backside, both of them practicing their combat skills in the process. Aizu paid close attention to the former's movements and noticed how incredible his abilities were. Aizawa took note of the boy's sudden interest and the way he was gazing at the teen. "What's up, kid?" he asked in a soft voice. Aiza didn't break his gaze but did tilt his head in a way that showed he was listening. "He's strong," he whispered. The man looked to Shuji and Ojiro and hummed in agreement. "He is, they all are." He then got down to the boy's level and asked, "What are you thinking about?" Aiza glanced down at his notebook, one side of it full of doodles and notes on most of the students and their quirks. He wasn't sure what to say and seemed to be struggling with finding the right words. Aizawa noticed this. "It's okay if you're not ready to talk to him yet. He wanted me to let you know that he understands and isn't mad." Aizu nodded and went back to watching and observing the other students. As the training continued on, Aizu would occasionally glance at Shuji, who he noticed had incredible stamina and endurance. The teen was barely breaking a sweat even as he appeared to be getting pushed to his limits, and after he succeeded in overwhelming his opponent, he would offer them praise and say how they're doing a great job. Even someone as abrasive and aggressive as Bakugu caught the boy's eye as he watched the blonde wield his explosions with expert care. Despite the way he had felt when the teen had dismissed him rather harshly, Aizu found Bakugu to be really cool, and his quirk was just as amazing. Nearly 30 minutes passed before Aizawa made everyone take a quick break before returning to training. Aizu was still sitting in his seat before being asked by Aizawa if he wanted to go join the others. The boy agreed and took hold of the hand being offered and was led to the drink stand where the students were hydrating and conversing. Aizu had left his notebook behind. As soon as one of the girls saw the boy and squealed out his name, some of the others also turned their attention to him and went to see him. "Hey Aizu, how are you doing, buddy?" Kaminari asked cheerfully. Aizu smiled and said, "I'm okay. You guys look so cool with your quirks." The compliment made Kaminari smile with glee as he gushed over how sweet the boy was. As the others began to talk with Aizu and ask him what he thought about the training, he glanced over and saw Shuji standing off to the side talking with Tokoyami while sipping from a water bottle. The teen had noticed the boy looking at him and offered him a polite wave. To Shuji's surprise, and even Aizu's surprise, the boy waved back shyly, a tentative smile on his face. Part of him wanted to go over and try talking to him, but something inside of him was keeping him in place. It felt as though his heart wanted to give him a chance while his brain and body was telling him not to trust the teen. But he seems really nice. Maybe he's not like the scary Nomo, but Aizu? Hey, you okay? Aizu was startled out of his thoughts as he quickly looked up at Eri, who was staring at him with concern. He nodded his head. 10 minutes passed before the students returned to their training and Aizu returned to his spot beside Aizawa. He continued to observe the students while they practiced with their quirks, and at one point, he even started taking notes on Shuji while paying close attention to him and how he used his quirk. The more he watched Shuji, the greater the urge to want to talk to him grew, though his past trauma and fears were making it hard for him to go through with it. Aizawa noticed the boy's body language and expression, but chose to not say anything. The training period finally came to an end and the students were dismissed to the locker rooms before returning to their class, but not before they all waved at Aizu and gave their goodbyes as he was led back to his class by Aizawa. "So, what did you think?" he questioned as he and Aizu walked down the hallway in relative silence. His hand grasped onto his smaller one. Aizu glanced up at him and smiled. I liked it a lot. The man smiled with a chuckle. Well, that's good. If you want, and if it's okay with your teacher, you're more than welcome to come and watch again. Aizu's eyes widened in surprise. Really? Aizawa nodded. Of course. Plus, I think the others would like it too. They talk about you a lot during class, and I'm sure Tagata wouldn't mind it, either. This made Aizu blush as he smiled giddily and snuggled the man's arm with his hand still holding Aizawa's. The pro-hero smiled fondly at the boy. Hopefully this would help Aizu with conquering his fears. The next couple of days played out the same after that. While Class 1 as hero training didn't always take place at the PE grounds, it didn't keep Aizu from being able to come and see. Mommy had allowed Aizu to observe the students during their training so long as he didn't get hurt. It was also a great way for him to go out and get some fresh air and exercise, which was essentially incorporated into his daily recess break. The students didn't mind in the slightest, and were happy to have the tiny spectator watch them while they trained. It helped boost their self-esteem as Aizu watched with enthusiasm and shouted encouraging things to them. Even Shuji had begun to receive verbal praise and encouraging words from the boy, which surprised not only him, but everyone else as well, although Aizu was still a bit hesitant to approach the large teen on his own. Still, it was far better than having the boy be deathly afraid of Shuji and refusing to even look in his direction, and any sort of improvement and progress was better than none at all. But then it happened. The very next day, during their usual 10-minute break from training, Aizu had finally worked up the courage to go up to Shuji. Shuji was sitting at one of the seats off to the side and wiping a towel over his sweat-covered face and neck when he felt a tiny presence next to him. Glancing to his left, he was genuinely shocked to see little Aizu standing there timidly with his hands behind his back. Aizu? Shuji whispered while setting his towel down and leaning forward a bit. Hey there. Aizu managed to glance up at Shuji while muttering, Hi. His feet were shuffling nervously while he fidgeted a bit. Shuji carefully crouched down in front of the boy and gazed at him gently. What is it, Aizu? Aizu looked at him, still appearing anxious but determined, and after taking a deep breath, he whispered, I'm sorry I was so scared of you. And I'm sorry for calling you a Nomu. His hands fell to his sides and clenched and unclenched into tiny fists. Thought you were scary and mean at first, but you're not scary or mean. Not at all. The other students had noticed the boy talking with Shuji but didn't approach them, instead choosing to watch from afar. Even Aizawa had taken notice. Shuji, despite the mask covering his face, smiled fondly at the boy. I'm glad to hear that. And it's okay. I know my appearance can be a bit terrifying to some people, so it's all right. Aizu nodded with a soft hum before bringing his hand up and holding it out to the teen. I want to be your friend, if that's okay? Shuji's eyes widened a fraction before they softened. He took hold of the boy's tiny hand and gently stroked the top of it. Of course. I want to be your friend, too. Aizu's eyes widened and they even started to tear up a bit before he came closer to the teen and held his arm out to him. Shuji smiled and gently pulled the boy into a tender embrace, the webbing of his arms acting as a protective cradle around the child as he felt him wrap his arms around his neck and snuggle against him. The other students watched the tender moment with relief on their faces, some of them cooing over how sweet and adorable it was. Even Aizawa couldn't help but smile at the child as he was held close to Shuji, and he also saw the smile on the boy's face. It wasn't a forced or strained smile, but a genuine one. The same kind of smile he would wear when Mirio was around. Tagata will be happy to hear about this. It was such a relief to learn that Aizu had finally made friends with the large teen. After he'd finally warmed up to Shuji and solidified their friendship with physical affection, it was much easier for everyone to mosey on over to the boy without him getting scared or nervous. Granted, he was still wary of those who he's never met before, but it didn't change the fact that the child was making such remarkable progress that it was a major juxtaposition from how he was from the start. As long as he knew who his friends and allies were and understood that they had no intentions of hurting him, they didn't care how long it took for him to cozy up to others. Even Todoroki, who was a bit awkward and stiff around the boy at first, also couldn't help but feel fond of the child, and was even comfortable enough to show Aizu his flames. He still wasn't comfortable with sharing his personal life, especially regarding his father, Endeavor. Luckily, Aizu has yet to prod him for more info, and hopefully it stays that way. The only one who had not yet interacted with Aizu one-on-one and gotten to know him better was none other than Katsuki Bakugu. Whenever Aizu came to visit them at Class 1 as Heights Alliance or he sat in on one of their training sessions, Aizu, despite feeling a bit nervous and timid around the blonde, would work up the courage to go up and say hello to Bakugu and try to make small talk. Bakugo would respond by either walking away from the boy without a word or would scoff at him by saying things like, "Beat it, kid," or, "I don't feel like getting all buddy-buddy with a snot-nosed brat like you." This would obviously hurt the little boy's feelings, but despite this, it didn't deter him from trying to get to know the teen, and it especially didn't put a damper over his admiration for Bakugo and his quirk. In fact, Bakugo was the only one out of the rest of Class 1A who Aizu had made painstakingly detailed notes about and all the things he was capable of doing with his quirk. He even went out of his way to make the drawing of Bakugo's hero costume the most detailed out of everyone. Needless to say, and in a rather ironic twist, Bakugo was Aizu's favorite out of all the students of Class 1A in terms of viewing him as a person with great potential and who truly possessed the makings of an amazing hero, despite Bakugo's refusal to acknowledge him and see him as a friend like the rest of his classmates have. But the day everyone learns the truth about Aizu is when Bakugo gets a massive wake-up call, and he seriously re-evaluates himself, why he wants to be a hero, and what it truly means to be the best. "Okay, Aizu, okay, what's my name?" Uraraka questioned cheerfully with a big smile on her face while pointing to herself. Aizu stared at her and pondered for a moment before stammering out, "Loka, Lochako." He finally said the girl's given name, which made her clap happily while praising the boy by saying, "Good job, Aizu. Very good." This made him immensely giddy and happy. "Okay, now then who's this?" She pointed to Azui, who stared at the boy expectantly while waiting for him to answer. "Sue." He responded cheerfully. More claps and praises were his reward. "Good job, Aizu," Azui remarked while petting his head. He had attempted to say the girl's preferred nickname, Sue, the first time, but ended up getting tongue-tied when trying to pronounce the syllable, and thus, resulted in going with calling her Tsuth instead. Azui didn't mind, though, at least he was trying. Plus, Sue sounded just as cute, if not even cuter, than Tsu, so she had no complaints being called Sue. "And me," Mina chimed while poking her cheeks with her pointer fingers and smiling brightly. Aizu didn't hesitate as he squeaked out, "Mina." This earned him even more praise and claps, and even a quick snuggle and a peck on the cheek from the pink girl, and Aizu couldn't get enough of it. Aizu was currently sitting on the floor of the living room at Class 1 as Heights Alliance, surrounded by some of the girls, including Uraraka, Azui, Momo and Mina, and a few boys consisting of Kirishima, Siro, Satu and, surprisingly, even Tokoyami, were also participating. The boy had been making such amazing progress as far as his reading and writing skills, and his fine motor and memorization skills were also very impressive for someone who was isolated from normal society for an indefinite amount of time. Some of the students decided to help him with his memorizing skills by quizzing him on their names and how they're pronounced, and so far, it was going very well. Prior to this, Mirio had been called in by Sir Night Eye for patrol duty, and while Mirio had no trouble with this, there was one small issue. Mommy was away from the school due to a family emergency, and his friends were also away after being called in for their work studies, leaving Mirio trying to figure out who to leave Aizu with. He could always ask one of the teachers, of course, since Nedzu did inform him that they were always happy to help should he need it, and while Mirio knew this, he also knew that final exams were coming up, and the teachers were busy with preparing the students. He didn't want to give them more than they already had on their plate. That's when Aizawa stepped in and offered to look after little Aizu for him, and before Mirio could say anything that even remotely sounded like a protest, the man insisted and assured that it was no trouble and quote, "He's honestly a very easy child to deal with, and it's not like it's any different than how my students behave." That earned him a belly laugh from the blonde teen. Mirio thanked the man and assured Aizu that he would be back soon and to be good while he was gone, to which the boy answered with, "I will, Mirionette. I'll be a very good boy," followed by that adorable toothy smile that was so pure, it could possibly cure cancer. And of course, upon entering the dorm building with the little one in tow, almost everyone in Class 1A wasted no time in greeting the boy and fawning over him while their exhausted-looking homeroom teacher gave them a dismissive wave before turning and making his way to his dorm office while muttering, "I'll leave this to you guys, then. Please behave and don't get too carried away." Which brings us to the present. What's his name, Aizu? Azui pointed to Tokoyami, who stood there with his arms crossed and a neutral expression on his bird-like face. Fua, Fumi, Fumika Kyai. The girls giggled bubbly, and even Tokoyami couldn't help the deep chuckle that rumbled in his chest. Close. It's pronounced Fumika. He corrected the boy gently with a crooked smile. Very good. Aizu smiled at the teen's praise and even blushed a bit. After recovering from their brief laughing fit, Uraraka got his attention by patting his knee and saying, "Okay, Aizu, okay, who threeus, he?" She pointed to Kirishima, who smiled sweetly at the boy and waved at him. Iheiji, he answered hesitantly. Kirishima smiled a big toothy smile with his sharp-looking teeth showing and nodded his head. That's right. My full name is Aijuru, but Eiji is fine, too. Awesome job, little man. Aizu's blush became darker as he giggled while squirming around giddily. It was so cute seeing him get so excited over something that seemed small to others, but to him, it meant so much. Okay, let's see. Kirishima glanced around the room for a moment before he got an aha look on his face and said, "What's his name?" He was pointing to Bakugu, who was sitting by himself on one of the couches watching TV, a disinterested scowl on his face, likely from being called out when he wasn't even in on their little game. Aizu pondered for a bit, his little eyebrows knitting together. He was really good when it came to those whose names were short and only a couple of syllables long, but when it came to those with names like Tokoyami, which was 4 syllables long, it was a tad bit harder. It also didn't help that despite his progress, he did have some trouble with pronouncing certain Japanese characters and letters. Regardless, that didn't stop Aizu from trying, and it also didn't keep Bakugu from glancing over his shoulder to watch the boy. The boy appeared to be struggling with trying to remember the blonde's name. Luckily, Kirishima and the others were more than happy to give him a hand. His name is Katsuki. The redhead reminded him, a gentle grin on his face. Can you say Katsuki, Aizu? He emphasized each syllable for the boy, and Aizu attempted to copy him, but again he was having a bit of a hard time. Kata, Kadu dash, Kat Keituzu? Kirishima laughed softly. It's okay. You can do it, Aizu. Like this. Katigi. Try saying it with me, okay? Aizu tried again, going a little slower this time, but he was still struggling. Kakigadash, tu dash. Ka dash, Kazkazu, Kakatazu dash, Katusu. Aizu was desperately trying to pronounce the tsu in Bakugu's given name, but was struggling to say it correctly. Despite this, the others were patient with the boy and encouraged him to keep trying and to not give up, ignoring the blonde's snide remarks of, "He can't even pronounce my name right? What a joke." Eventually, after what felt like forever of Aizu trying to say the blonde's name and failing miserably, he finally huffed out and said, "Kaken." This was most definitely a surprise, even for Bakugu. "Kaken?" Kirishima repeated to himself, as if he was testing how it sounded on his tongue. Then, everyone started gushing at the adorable nickname. "Ah, Kaken. That's so cute. Kaken, huh? I like it. Has a nice ring to it, hee. It's okay, Aizu. You did your best. Just keep practicing and you'll get it, someday. But for now, I think Kaken is perfect." This made Aizu immensely happy and relieved, and he even started to chant the name in a sing-song manner, causing the girls to join in. The others, aside from Bakugu who just sat there gawking in disbelief, watched the boy fondly, and Kaminari even became bold and waltzed over to sit beside the teen with a shit-eating grin on his face. "Hee, looks like your new name is Kaken. Pretty cute, huh dash? Can it, dunce face?" Kaminari instantly went silent as his face deflated in defeat and rejection. He was snarling at this point, getting irritated at the others as they continued to chant that nickname. But despite his agitation at being called such a childish name, he calmly reminded himself that the kid, while annoying, is just that, a kid. It's not like he's their age, he can't just explode, figuratively and literally, on a little kid who is likely just using the new name as a means to better address him until he's able to call him by his full name. Still, it didn't make the situation any better, especially since some of the others came over and began playfully addressing him as Kaken, which pissed him off even more. After that, some of the students dispersed and went about their own business while some of the others chose to stick around and keep an eye on Aizu, who was now making his way over to where the large TV was. He sat on the small couch perpendicular to the blonde who sat on the far end of the longer couch as he gazed at the show playing. It was some sort of live-action show involving heroes, possibly a documentary. Aizu instantly became excited at what he was seeing, even if he didn't entirely understand what was happening, as he reached over for his backpack, which was left lying on the large coffee table, and rummaged through it before pulling out his notebook and a pencil and then frantically beginning to write something down while glancing up at the screen every now and again. Bakugo had noticed the kid scribbling away in that notebook of his for some time, though he pretended not to care about it. The boy always looked so focused and determined whenever he would write in it, and it always boggled the teen's mind with things like, what the hell is he even writing, a novel? I've never seen a kid look so serious about scribbling in some stupid notebook. Not only that, but he's also noticed that the boy has a habit of mumbling to himself whenever he's in deep concentration, especially while writing in his notebook. The mumbling itself isn't all that weird, but at times, it can be a bit annoying when the teen just wants some peace and quiet, followed by him kicking himself for not seeking said peace and quiet by going up to his room. But despite his growing curiosity about both the boy's mumbling and his notebook, he wasn't the one to point it out as someone else beat him to it. What ya doing, Aizu? It was Siro who asked the question. Aizu glanced up at the teen and gave a big grin. Writing notes, he responded. Siro raised his brows. Oh yeah? What kind of notes? Aizu glanced back down at his book and stared at it for a moment before holding his notebook out for the teen to see. They're notes on pro heroes and quirks. Wow, really? That sounds super cool. Siro beams cheerfully. Is it okay if I see them? Aizu glanced down at his notes for a moment, a look of slight hesitation shining in his eyes, before he looked up at Siro again and gave a tentative little smile and held up his notebook. Siro smiled widely and happily took the book from the child and peered down at the chicken scratch of notes. While the boy's handwriting was a bit hard to make out at first, primarily because the child had taken to writing in mostly hiragana, and judging by the misspelling of some words, his vocabulary wasn't quite there just yet, after looking at the notes for a moment, Siro was able to understand what was written, which was actually very impressive. Holy cow! This is really good, Aizu. Siro praised cheerfully while flipping through a couple more pages where more notes and intricate sketches of pro heroes were scattered around. Wow! This is amazing, Aizu. You wrote all of these yourself? He asked, genuinely curious and impressed. Aizu nodded shyly, a light blush coloring his freckled cheeks. Hey dude! Siro and Aizu looked to see Kirishima, Kaminari and Mina walking over to them. What ya doing? The redhead asked before his eyes landed on the small notebook in the cellophane teen's hands. Hey, what's that? Guys, you've got to check these notes out. He waved his friends over, frantically beckoning them to come over. Aizu wrote these all on his own. This seemed to pique their interest as all three students instantly came over and stood next to their friend as he held out the book for them to see. Just like Siro, the other members of the Bakugang all shared the same ecstatically impressed expression on their faces. No way! Aizu made these. These are amazing. I knew the little dude was a special guy, but these? Man, this is some next-level intellect right here. Totally manly. Right? At this time, Aizu had climbed down from the couch and had come around, so he was now standing in front of the students, his little hands wringing nervously while he watched them ogle over his hero. Notes while giving praise after praise. Eventually, this drew the attention of the rest of the Class 1A students as they all came over, aside from Bakugo, who was still sitting on the couch, trying to ignore his annoying classmates, to see what the fuss was about. What is all the commotion about? Ida demanded. Kirishima and the others flashed the class president a collective grin as they practically shoved the child's notebook into the teen's face and begged him and the others to see, which, of course, they did. Immediately, the praise and comments multiplied as they all flipped through the pages and skimmed over the surprisingly clean-looking drawings of both themselves and well-known pro-heroes, including All Might, of course, as well as the somewhat sloppily written notes tied to each individual and their respective quirks and abilities. There were even separate notes of each of their accessories and equipment used in combat training, which was also quite impressive. As they continued to fawn over the boys' notes and drawings, Aizu stood there in the center of the crowd with a mix of swelling happiness over their approval of his work and slight anxiousness over them taking liberties of going through all of his work, despite giving them permission to do so in the first place. To put it simply, Aizu wasn't used to having this much attention. That didn't make him feel threatened or unwanted over something he never considered special or worth praising. He especially wasn't used to people caring so much about what he's made to the point of sharing it with others who feel the same way. But regardless, he swallowed down his nervousness and accepted the praise and even managed to smile brightly. Then it happened. While the other Class 1A students were busy looking through the boys' impressive notes, none of them, not even Aizu, noticed Bakugo getting up from the couch and making his way around, so he was now leaning against the convex corner of the wall with his arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. You know, for someone who's so obsessed with pro-heroes and making creepy-ass notes on other people and their quirks, the brat sure doesn't seem too keen on showing off his own quirk. Bakugo's snide, offhanded remark was enough to cease the class's collective interest over the boy's notebook as they turned to the blonde in shocked silence. None of them noticed the stunned look on the boy's face. I mean, it seems a little weird that the kid has not once told anybody what his quirk is, and he doesn't seem all that interested in showing it off, unless it's something really dumb. Despite the deep disapproval of the blonde's unnecessary comments, the students couldn't help but consider his remarks and ponder over them. Then Ida was the first one to respond. Come to think of it, we really don't know what Aizu's quirk is. It does seem a little suspicious that he would take notes on other people's quirks and not write any on his own. Ida then quickly realized what he'd said and how it may have come off as he frantically went to correct himself, his hands moving around in that chopping motion. And not that there's anything wrong with writing notes on quirks, of course. These notes are quite impressive and very detailed. Aizu tried to stammer out a response, but didn't get the chance to as others also joined in and gave their own 2 cents on the matter. It does seem a bit weird, Todoroki stated, looking to be pondering over his own thoughts. Perhaps the teachers didn't want to run the risk of alerting the villains of his whereabouts by keeping his quirk secret, but still, that doesn't necessarily make sense if he's being kept here under supervision, at a hero school, of all places. That is true. We all use our quirks here during training, so it wouldn't make sense for him to not show off his quirk. I wonder what it could be. Maybe it's an emitter type, like Uraraka's or Todoroki's quirks. That would make sense, I think. Maybe, or it could possibly be a transformation type. I doubt it's a mutant type since he doesn't appear to have any physical abnormalities about him. Oh, I bet his quirk is something really badass, like Bakugo's explosions. What if it's something even cooler than explosions, like a mix between explosions and, lava? Hell yeah, that would be so cool. Maybe there's a clue in these notes as to what his quirk might be. Did we miss it somewhere? Why don't we just ask him? It would make more sense to do that, don't you think? Hee, yeah, you've got a point, Momo. Hey Aizu, what kind of quirk do you have, buddy? Is it an emitter type? Oh, wait, an emitter type quirk is basically like, well, it's basically like Uraraka's quirk, where you can generate or manipulate certain things and make them change. Kinda like that. Is it okay if you tell us what your quirk is, Aizu? Would that be alright? Oh, I know. What if we guess what it is? It can be like a game. How fun. What do you say, Aizu? Wanna do that? Wanna tell us what your quirk is dash? You are a quirkless little nothing, Aizu. Aizu's eyes widened at the last remark, only to realize that the voice it belonged to was Shigaraki's. Aizu instantly looked up, and to his horror he saw looming shadows with menacing expressions standing behind Shigaraki himself, the expression on his face just as sadistic and intimidating as he sneered at the frightened boy. He attempted to get away from Shigaraki and the shadowy figures, the students, who became instantly concerned for the boy, by backing away, only for him to back into a wall, the back of the couch. He was now backed into a corner with nowhere to escape to, and the leader of the League of Villains leering over him with that terrifying smile on his face. With nowhere to go and nothing else to do, Aizu slid down to the floor and covered his ears with his palms to try and drown out the sound around him, but it only seemed to make it worse as Shigaraki's cackling rang out in his ears. Nobody will ever want a quirkless little nothing like you. You really think these so-called heroes would even care to help you once they find out that you're quirkless? You're stupid if you think that. All heroes care about is fame and fortune, nothing else. They wouldn't hesitate to turn their noses up at you and leave you to die. Aizu was trembling violently. He couldn't feel anything else around him, almost numb to the outside world. You're lucky that we even considered taking you in, knowing that you would probably be lying dead in a ditch somewhere. You're lucky that we consider you a pet. At least as a pet, you're seen as a means of entertainment. If it weren't for me, you would be dead. Aizu began to whimper as tears rolled down his face, which he hid in his knees as he drew them up to his chest and began to rock back and forth. Remember this, Aizu. Quirkless. And quirkless people will never be anything in this world. If you don't want to end up trampled to death by those filthy rats called heroes, then know your place and submit to me. No. He finally managed to whimper out, despite not being able to hear it. He also didn't seem to hear the students around him frantically trying to calm him down while desperately trying to figure out what was wrong. In the midst of their incessant questions and pestering remarks, they were shocked and startled to see Aizu on the floor with his hands covering his ears, whimpering and crying, his body shaking uncontrollably and curling into a ball on the floor. Aizu! Hey Aizu! What's wrong? Hey, calm down little guy, it's okay. It's all right. Stop crowding around him. You're only making it worse. Yeah, and yelling like that will definitely make it better. Guys, stop. This is not the time or place to be bickering like this. Aizu needs us. Eri-chan's right. We need to do something instead of arguing. Well, what do you have in mind? Look, I don't know, okay? I've never dealt with something like this before. Among the students arguing and frantic attempts at trying to calm the boy down, Bakugo stood there in utter shock and disbelief at what was happening. His expression changed from smug and condescending to genuinely confused and even concerned for the same child who he had just mocked for his obsession a few seconds ago. It was honestly too much to witness, even for someone like Bakugo, who relished in the misery of others, especially when it was either self-inflicted or they deserved it. But not in this manner. This was not the kind of thing he took pleasure in. He didn't enjoy a kid, who had been a prisoner for an indefinite amount of time to villains, sobbing and crying while begging for, well, he wasn't sure why he was begging, but it didn't make the gut-wrenching feeling go away. Aizu continued to sob and weep, mumbling incoherently while continuing to rock and shake. Shigaraki's words echoing in his head and refusing to leave him be. You stupid brat. How dare you try and escape me? You really think you can do anything? You're quirkless. You can't do anything to fend for yourself, so what makes you think you can defy me? I'll make you understand just how useless you are. You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. You're unwanted by everyone, not even your own parents wanted you. I'll teach you what happens to quirkless little shits like you when they defy their masters. I'll make you regret ever trying to run from me. Quirkless. 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 Aizu continued to cry, sob and whimper, his breathing becoming uneven and haggard, and he was even starting to hyperventilate, which only made it harder for him to breathe between his sobbing. At this point, if it kept up like this and nobody did something soon, Aizu would end up passing out from lack of oxygen, if the panic attack he was having didn't do it first. Having had enough of watching the poor child suffer like this and listening to her classmates bickering instead of working together, Momo pushed her way past them and carefully crouched down in front of the whimpering mess that was Aizu. Slowly and ever so gently, she placed her hand tenderly through his hair, causing him to flinch before she began to shush him. Aizu, she cooed softly. Aizu, baby, it's okay. Look at me. She waited patiently for Aizu to do as she'd asked. Aizu recognized the kind-sounding voice as Momo's, which was nothing like that of Shigaraki's. After a few more seconds, he tentatively lifted his head and peered up at the girl. Her heart ached at the sight of the poor thing. His face was blotchy, puffy and covered in tears and snot. His brilliant emerald eyes bloodshot and glazed over with tears. Ignoring the aching feeling in her chest, she smiled tenderly at the child and went to carefully lift him off the ground and into her lap. She then used her quirk to create a handkerchief so she could carefully dry his eyes and clean his face, her movements slow and thoughtful. The last thing she or anyone else wanted was for the boy to freak out again. After gently cleaning the boy's face and tucking the now soiled cloth into her back pocket, she wrapped her arms around the small boy, cradling him protectively in a similar manner as Nijire, adjusting him so that he's sitting sideways on her lap while she rests on her knees. Aizu, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions and the memories of the cruel and horrific things Shigaraki said and did to him, began to cry again while burying his face into Momo's chest, his tiny hands clutching onto the front of her blouse. This was one of the things that made Momo such a valuable candidate as a pro-hero in training. Her ability to provide emotional support and comfort behind the scenes of combat. It wasn't just physically rescuing civilians that made a pro, but also being able to give them assurance and peace of mind that counted just as much, and Momo was one of those who was naturally gifted at it. Many have even compared her to that of a surrogate motherly figure, even to her fellow classmates. And this was the perfect time for her to put her maternal skills to the test. While the little boy cried and wept, and Momo did what she could to comfort and soothe him, all everybody else can do is just stand there and watch the heartbreaking scene while silently racking their brains as to how this could have happened. But soon, the answers become clear, and soon after, they all secretly wished they hadn't asked such invasive questions or pried it from the small boy in the first place. Aizu, Momo cooed softly, her hand resting on his back and rubbing soothingly. "We're very sorry for upsetting you, love. We didn't mean to do that. Please, tell us what's on your mind." Momo doesn't want to force the boy to answer, but she also doesn't want to leave things as they are. It's best that they all know exactly what caused the boy such distress so they'll know not to make the same mistake again. With a few more sniffles and a tiny whimper escaping his lips, Aizu keeps his gaze down as he speaks, his voice so quiet the others practically have to strain to be able to hear. I'm scared, Esith. She ran her hands soothingly through his hair, hoping the action would calm him some. "Why are you scared, sweetheart?" Momo asked, coaxing the boy to rest his head against her chest. "I'm scared, because..." He paused to take a deep and shaky breath. "I don't want everyone to hate me." This genuinely shocked everyone to hear. Momo took a moment to gather her bearings again before gently coaxing him to explain, but Aizu seemed reluctant. "Oh, Aizu, baby, why in the world would you think that? There's no way we could ever hate you." Aizu shook his head, refusing to look up at the girl. Momo let out a sigh before placing her finger under his chin and gently forcing him to look up at her, that same tender smile on her face. "I promise you, Aizu, no matter what you tell us, we could never hate you. Even if it has to do with your quirk, I assure you, we won't hate you." The boy pondered her words for a moment before he quietly glanced up at Momo and asked softly, "You promise?" Momo smiled softly and caressed the boy's cheek with her thumb. "I promise." Taking another shaky breath, Aizu said, I don't have a quirk. I'm quirkless." Momo, as well as those who were close enough to hear, felt their breaths hitch. Everyone became stiff and wide-eyed, a few of them even covering their mouths upon learning the truth and the context behind Aizu's ties with the League. Another small whimper was heard before the boy began to explain. Explain as best as he could through another wave of tears and sobs. "They told me that heroes don't care about quirkless people. Shigaraki said that I'm worthless, that I'm no better than a bug or a pebble on the road, and everybody will hate me if find out I'm quirkless." He tried to wipe his eyes, but it wasn't any good. More tears replaced those he'd wiped away. He then opted to curl up even tighter into Momo's chest. "No, nobody wants somebody like me around. Somebody who's quirkless like me would end up dead in a ditch. I'm useless." The atmosphere in the whole common area became thick with uncomfortable tension and dreaded uneasiness. Nobody said a single word. They couldn't. How could they? What does one even say after learning that not only did the League and Hasaikai keep a small boy in captivity, but said boy was also quirkless? Though it wouldn't have mattered, it would be one thing if Aizu had some semblance of a quirk. Even if it was minuscule and not as powerful as that of, say, Bakugo's explosion quirk, at least Aizu would have a fighting chance at protecting himself. But that wasn't the case at all. Aizu is quirkless, and judging by his initial reactions to feeling overpowered, he doesn't have any sense of self-defense or any form of physical strength. And it was this exact realization that left a disgusting taste in everyone's mouths and an unsettling feeling in the pits of their stomachs. What made the whole thing even more disturbing was the fact that Aizu's whole statement about quirkless people being treated as less than human wasn't completely false. Over 80% of the human population was born with some sort of quirk, and for those who are born either with their quirks developing later in their life or without one at all, life was anything but fair. Even if a quirkless person did manage to succeed in their adult life, it often came with much hardships, and for such hardships to befall that of a 5-year-old boy who's had the whole thought of even pro-heroes turning their backs on him, it was far too upsetting to think about. The room fell deafeningly silent, aside from Aizu's whimpers and Momo's gentle cooing, until, "Get over here, Sparky," Bakugo demanded as he grabbed Kaminari roughly by the arm as he was led around the corner towards the first flight of stairs leading to the second floor, much to everyone's sudden confusion, especially Kaminari's. But before anybody could do or say anything or try and make sense of the blonde's sudden action, a loud and crackling buzzing sound erupted from around the corner as a result of Kaminari's electrification quirk, causing everyone, including Aizu, to jolt from the shock, no pun intended. Shortly after that, Kaminari re-emerged from around the corner before being promptly shoved forward by Bakugo himself, and Kaminari was now reduced to his derp side due to his brain short-circuiting from overuse of his quirk. This resulted in not only several students bursting into boisterous laughter, but much to everyone's relief, even Aizu started to giggle despite his tears. As the room filled with the echoes of laughter, Bakugo came over and picked up Aizu's notebook, which had been carelessly discarded on the ground after the sudden panic. After checking the book to make sure it hadn't sustained any serious damage, Bakugo glanced at Aizu, who was still giggling in Momo's lap. "So you say Shigaraki told you that people will hate you if they find out you're quirkless?" Bakugo asked, catching Aizu's attention, as well as the attention of anybody nearby who was listening. The teen scoffed at those very words. "Well, he was wrong, you know?" Aizu's eyes widened a fraction. "He was?" Bakugo hummed in confirmation while skimming through the boy's notebook, carefully examining the notes written on each page. He paused when he got to the page with his quirk and the sketch of him in his hero costume. He was honestly really impressed with what the boy had written about him. "You say that you're worthless and you're someone that nobody would want. Well, let me tell you something, kid, there are plenty of amazing pros out there with equally amazing quirks, but not very many of them possess the intellect and analytical skills that matches their strength and power, and for someone like you, a quirkless and useless nobody, to have a talent at taking such detailed notes on even the most complex of quirks, if you ask me, that's not something I would call useless." This was something Aizu had not expected to hear from the normally short-tempered and explosive blonde. His mouth hung open as he stared in utter disbelief at Bakugo, even as he came closer and crouched down beside him and Momo, who was just as shocked as the boy was. "This here," Bakugo motioned to the boy's notebook which he held out for him to take, which he did, "is really impressive. You're a pretty smart kid, and even if you are quirkless, who says a quirkless person can't be useful?" Everyone else turned their attention to Bakugo after regaining their composure from laughing so hard at poor Kaminari's state. "You mean it?" Aizu asked tentatively. Bakugo nodded. "If that bastard Shigaraki thinks that you're useless because you're quirkless, then he obviously has no idea what the hell he's talking about." He then tapped on the ridge of the notebook's pages. "This right here is proof that you're anything but useless." Aizu couldn't believe what he was hearing. He was at a loss for words. Somewhere deep down inside of him, Aizu wanted so badly to not believe Bakugo, but he also felt like he was telling the truth. "He's right, Aizu." Momo and Bakugo turned to Ida, who had piped up with a confident grin on his face. "You may not possess a quirk, But that doesn't mean your worth is less than that of a pro hero, or even that of a normal civilian. That awful man is simply ignorant and blind to what a gifted person you are. For someone so young to be as intelligent as you, you're a rarity indeed. As the others began to murmur amongst each other, Shudo felt compelled to add to Ida's and Bakugu's earlier statements. They're both right, Aizu. He offered the boy a kind smile. Being quirkless is so rare nowadays, it's almost a shock to discover someone who's without a quirk of some kind. In my opinion, I think you're at a much greater advantage. The child tilted his head in slight confusion, prompting Shudo to explain. Having a quirk and being able to work as a pro hero is so common, it's almost a given that someone wants to be a hero. But for you, you have something that's even greater than any sort of quirk, and it's your ability to analyze and study the abilities and movements of each individual. Anybody can take notes on quirks, but it takes an especially gifted person to not only take notes, but to do so in a matter of minutes. I've seen how you take notes of us during training, and it's incredibly impressive how much you've managed to record of every one of us in such a short amount of time. Just like with Bakugo, Shudo's words caused Aizu to stare in disbelief and complete astonishment. It was as if someone had told him he was special for the first time ever, and it felt amazing. And it seemed that everyone else decided to follow their lead as the others also commented on just how awesome Aizu was even without a quirk, proving both Momo's and Bakugo's point that nobody hated him for being quirkless. This revelation made his heart swell with a fluttering warm feeling that he couldn't quite put a name to, and he felt his eyes watering with more tears, but this time, they were tears of joy rather than sadness. Momo smiled fondly at the boys and voiced her gratitude to them for their thoughtful words. It seemed that Aizu wasn't the only one whose hearts they touched. Everyone in the room smiled at the scene of little Aizu crying tears of joy. Bakugo, smirking softly at the boy, placed his hand on his head and ruffled his hair playfully, albeit a tad rougher than how Mirio does it, but Aizu doesn't seem to mind. "Geez, you sure cry a lot, kid. What a crybaby." The blonde's teasing remark made Aizu burst into more giggles as the tears continued to pour from his eyes, but the smile on his face made the teasing worth it. While he would never admit it out loud, Bakugo thought the kid's smile was pretty damn cute. "Hey guys. We should totally have a celebration," Mina exclaimed. Everyone looked at her in confusion, prompting her to explain. "Aizu was so brave telling us he's quirkless, and he's made such awesome progress since he's come to UA. We should throw a little celebration for him, and plus, it'll help cheer him up even more." They pondered this idea for a moment before Uraraka responded. "That doesn't sound like a bad idea, Mina-chan, but what sort of celebration did you have in mind?" Mina grinned widely before grabbing the remote off of the coffee table and changing the channel to a hip-hop music channel as Mina began to dance to the beat of the music that played loudly on the TV. "That's easy. We'll have a dance party, of course," she chirped while getting more into the groove of the music. She even bounced over to Aizu and held out her hands to him while her lower half swayed to the beat. "Do you want to dance with me, Aizu? I'll be your partner." Aizu smiled brightly and nodded as he held out his hands to the pink girl, squealing happily as he was suddenly pulled from Momo's grasp and into Mina's awaiting arms. Mina began dancing to the music again, this time with her dance partner. The movements had the little boy squealing and laughing with joy, and despite the tear tracks on his cheeks and puffiness around his bloodshot eyes, the huge smile on Aizu's face spoke volumes. While the others felt a bit out of place at the impromptu dance party, they eventually found the courage and decided to join in on the fun, not wanting to seem like party poopers. If it would make Aizu feel better, then a little dancing wouldn't hurt anybody. At one point, Satu offered to prepare some snacks, to which Uraraka and Azui even offered to help with. Aoyama even went to retrieve the large disco ball from his room so they could turn the common area into a makeshift dance room. Overall, it seemed that Aizu was having a great time. The idea to have an impromptu dance party to cheer him up was probably the best thing ever, and all of the sadness and stress Aizu felt before had melted away and was replaced with a big smile and dazzling green orbs. What the students and Aizu didn't know, however, was that Aizawa had been standing behind the corner listening to the whole thing, even the part about Bakugo comforting Aizu with encouraging words. Aizawa couldn't help the smile on his face and the deep chuckle rumbling in his chest as he felt a newfound sense of pride for his students, all while thinking to himself, they're going to make outstanding heroes, someday. Mirio walked down the walkway of the downtown area in his usual confident swagger while wearing both his hero costume and his trademark smile. Bubble Girl was accompanying him and trying to make small talk in order to pass the time. While Mirio still has school obligations to fulfill, he doesn't have to worry about missing too many classes while employed under Sir Night-Eye, especially since he's already earned the bulk of his class credits through hard work and perseverance during his freshman and sophomore years. There was still the final exams he had to worry about, but as long as he mostly does patrols during his work study, he can use any free time to study in Sir Night-Eye's office without being disturbed. For now, he and Bubble Girl are busy patrolling the streets while discussing various topics, including Aizu. Bubble Girl hadn't met Aizu in person yet, so she was curious about what the little boy was like and began asking questions to the teen. This made Mirio laugh internally at the thought of Aizu winning the hearts of just about anybody, even those who haven't even met him yet. But as Mirio went on to talk about Aizu and all the fun things he's gotten to show the boy, the sound of Bubble Girl's phone suddenly ringing interrupted him. Upon checking her phone, she gasped when she saw that it was Sir Night-Eye calling her. Sir, I wonder what it is. Bubble Girl quickly answered the call, sounding as professional as she could while listening to her boss speak. Yes, sir. We were in the middle of our patrols when Where are we? She looked around for a street sign before spotting one and quickly giving the man their location. Is everything okay, sir? Oh, okay. I see. We'll wait right here. Thank you, sir. Goodbye. Mirio raised a brow while staring at the woman. Sensing the teen's confusion, Bubble Girl looked at him and said, It was Sir Night-Eye. He said that he's coming to pick us up, so we need to wait here for him. Oh. Mirio responded. Though he wanted to ask what the man's reason would be for the sudden call, he didn't press the issue and simply waited near the street sign until they spotted a car coming towards them before coming to a stop. Mirio could see two people inside, Sir Night-Eye and Detective Tsukachi. WhatIf? Mirio was now even more confused, but he didn't have time to ask what was going on as Tsukachi rolled down the window on his side and said, Get in. We're heading to the station. The man could see the look of confusion on both Mirio's and Bubble Girl's faces, and so he assured them that they weren't in trouble, but it was very important. Once all four of them were in the car, Tsukachi began to drive down the busy downtown street towards the police station. So, Mirio started. What exactly is going on? Is everything okay? Part of him was worried it had something to do with the investigation involving the League and Hasaikai, but what Tsukachi said to him was far more serious than that, something that he didn't expect to happen so soon. It's Aizu. Mirio's eyes widened at the mention of the boy's name, and he found that he couldn't get his voice to work. When they came to a stoplight, Tsukachi took this time to turn and look at the teen in the eye, his gaze hard and serious. We found them. We found his records, his medical records, family history, and even some more detailed information on one of his parents. And also, there's been a new development in the case, and it also has to do with Aizu. I'll explain everything to you when we get to the station. The car ride to the police station couldn't end quickly enough. The anticipation of finally learning the truth but having to remain calm in the meantime felt almost too overwhelming for Mirio. He wasn't someone who got impatient, especially during his work studies, but this was the first time in a very long time that the teen felt like he was on pins and needles. But he forced himself to remain calm and focus on the window. Bubble Girl, sensing the obvious tension from the teen, placed a calm hand on his shoulder, catching his attention. She flashed him an understanding smile and whispered to him, It'll all be okay. I promise. He knew that she was right. He also knew that despite the ambiguity of Aizu's past, which has, up until now, been shrouded in mystery and seemingly lost forever, they would finally find out what was going on with Aizu and what his ties are to the League of Villains and the Yakuza. Everything would be okay, and Mirio was grateful to his partner and friend for reminding him. After over half an hour of driving, they finally reached their destination. Mirio all but stuck to Tsukachi's backside like glue as he and the other two followed close behind. They arrived at a room where the detective ushered everyone inside before closing the door behind him. It was a plain-looking conference room with a long table and several chairs, and sitting in one of the chairs already, to Mirio's surprise, was Toshinori himself. The man gave a friendly smile while waving at the group. After that, Tsukachi gestured for everyone to take their seats, with Mirio and Sir sitting on either side of Toshinori, Bubble Girl sitting next to Sir and Tsukachi sitting directly across from them. A couple other officers, including Tsukachi's partner, chose to stand. The cat-headed man handed Tsukachi a device that looked to be some sort of remote control for a digital projector before bowing his head and standing off to the side. Once everyone was present and accounted for and he had what they needed, the man cleared his throat and began the discussion. It took us quite a while to uncover even a scrap of information regarding the boy and his family. It was almost as if someone had deliberately kept these confidential records hidden away from us, and whether or not it was done by the villain leaders themselves or a third-party member is still unclear. Tsukachi clicked the remote and a large projector screen slowly appeared from above the ceiling under a hidden compartment. On the screen was what looked to be a birth certificate that could only belong to Aizu. There were also 3 photographs. The first one was of Aizu, which looked to be fairly recent. The second one was of a woman with long green hair and large green eyes. She looked to be in her mid-late 20s, possibly her early 30s, and was a spitting image of Aizu, in terms of his big, expressive green eyes and matching green hair color. The third and final one was of a man who looked to be in his 30s or 40s with curly white hair, almond-shaped gray eyes and freckles. At least Mirio now knew where Aizu had gotten his features from. The child's full name is Izuku Midoriya, Tsukachi stated while pointing to the certificate. He was born on July 15 near Shizuoka Prefecture. He is the only child of Inko and Hisashi Midoriya. The new information hit Mirio like a sudden thump to the head. Aizu, so, his name is Izuku Midoriya, huh? Izuku, I like it, but I think Aizu fits him much better. He smiled to himself at the endearing nickname for the boy. He also realized that both he and Aizu shared the same birthday, July 15th. But before he could internally cheer at the fact that he would get to celebrate their birthdays together, he was pulled from his thoughts and brought back to reality when Tsukachi went on to explain the full details of Aizu's history. According to the records we were able to find, the mother, Inko, worked as a legal file clerk for a small law firm in central Mizudafu, and the father, Hisashi, worked as a pro-hero who went by the hero name Flamethrower. He was employed at a hero agency in Tokyo before being transferred to a branching agency in America. Mirio hummed with intrigue. It was very interesting to learn the details of Aizu's family history and getting to see what his parents looked like. It was especially interesting getting to find out that his father was a pro-hero. But that's where the key term stuck out to him, was. Unfortunately, Inko was killed during a serious villain attack that had occurred at a large shopping mall over 2 years ago, along with many others who were also killed or severely injured. The man clicked the remote, changing the screen to several images and snapshots of what appeared to be the aftermath of a major crime scene. Police tape covering nearly every inch of the scene, parts of the shopping mall dilapidated and completely destroyed. It's as if a massive tornado had charged through the complex. It's not exactly clear as to how many villains were a part of the incident or who was responsible for orchestrating the attack itself, but we were able to locate and interview some of the witnesses who were present that day, and from what they told us, Inko wasn't alone that day. The man cleared his throat while also taking in the look of anticipation on the teen's features. It turns out she had brought her son along with her to the mall that day, and when the rescue team was sent in to detain the villains and help any survivors, her corpse was recovered, but the boy was nowhere to be found. If the date and time of the incident are accurate, Aizu would have been 3 years old at the time. He paused, allowing the news to sink in before continuing. And as for the father, Hisashi, he's still alive, thankfully, but his current whereabouts are unknown. We contacted the hero agency he was employed at as well as the agency he was transferred to overseas, but according to them, while Hisashi was informed of the tragic news involving his wife's murder and his son going missing, he didn't seem to be as stricken with grief as they would have expected someone to be after learning of such an incident. They stated that while, yes, he appeared to be quite shocked by the news, he didn't seem all that concerned or astonished. An uncomfortable knot began to form deep within Mirio's gut. How could someone not be shocked upon learning that their only son was kidnapped after a serious villain attack? Sure, everyone's emotions are expressed differently after receiving terrible news, but To not show any form of concern for your 3-year-old son going missing? It was downright baffling. They offered to give him 3 months paid leave so he could return home and take care of the preparations for his wife's funeral and assured him that he would still be employed, even offering to extend his paid leave if requested, but according to them, Hisashi politely refused and assured them he was fine. Mirio was really starting to dislike this Hisashi guy the longer this went on. They said he went back to his condo later that evening after receiving the news, seemingly acting normal, but then the next morning he never came in for work. He didn't call them beforehand to request the day off or to say that he was running late. When they tried to contact him, his phone was disconnected, and they even went to his condo only to find that he was gone. They even contacted the agency where he was previously employed and asked to be connected to him, and they said they couldn't get a hold of him either. It's almost as if Hisashi just disappeared. Okay, now things were starting to make less sense. Are you saying that Hisashi has gone AWOL? Sir questioned, his tone serious. And what about the commissioners? Are they aware of this too? We questioned both CEOs of the agencies Hisashi was employed with, and they both stated that prior to just up and leaving out of the blue, he'd been acting rather strangely when the news reached him. He was shocked by the death of his wife, of course, but when he was told that his son was missing, well, according to them, he didn't react the way they would have expected someone to after finding out their only child has possibly been kidnapped. We also contacted the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission to see if they were aware of this, and to our surprise, she wasn't. Neither were her associates. We also checked the Pro Hero registry, but couldn't find any recent activities on Hisashi under his hero name or hero agency's name after the time of the incident. Not only that, but his hero license hasn't been renewed in nearly 3 years. That was very weird and very suspicious. For a pro hero to not make a report on his whereabouts and not have his license renewed was very odd. It would make more sense if he ended up being suspended from hero duties and having his license temporarily revoked, then him being inactive would fit in with the evidence. But that's not the case at all. It just doesn't make any sense. Tashinori leaned forward a bit and said, "There's more to his strange behavior and choices than meets the eye, isn't there? Could it be that Hisashi Midoriya was actually aware of Aizu's kidnapping? Not to say he's the one who had his wife killed or anything of the sort, but for him to not show any signs of grief or despair for his wife and child and then to just disappear afterward without informing anyone, it just seems so out of character. At least, for someone like him, it is." This shocked Mirio to hear from the typically passive man, but it also caused his skin to crawl at the idea of a man being completely aware of his own child being taken by villains. Tsukachi scratched at his neck and cleared his throat before speaking again, his face stern. It's still too early to say for sure if that is the case, but it is possible that Hisashi knew about Aizu going missing all along, which would explain his strange behavior upon learning of his son's disappearance. Mirio felt his breath get caught in his throat. It's already suspicious enough that he cut off all contact with his associates and seemingly left town with no means of contacting him around the same time that his wife was killed and his son went missing. While we don't have much in the way of evidence to back this theory up just yet, I can't help but lean more heavily to the possibility of that being the case. After pausing for a second or two to collect his thoughts, he continued, but not before bringing everyone's attention back to the screen where the images of the crime scene were still visible. Despite there being eyewitnesses at the scene of the incident in which Mrs. Midoriya was murdered and her Aizu had gone missing, there was nothing in the form of a missing persons report made on Aizu, and it doesn't seem as though Hisashi made any attempt at filing a missing persons report or even contacting the police. Considering that he was the only person to be aware of Aizu's disappearance and was, at least in my opinion, obligated to take action and put up a search for his missing son, it's difficult to look at this and just chalk it up to being a mere coincidence. What? Mirio snapped in exacerbation, his fists slamming against the table. Aizu's own father. WhatIf? Are you saying that Hisashi, Aizu's own father, he's the reason why Aizu ended up being taken by villains? The teen couldn't help the words as they came tumbling out of his mouth. I thought he was a pro hero. Aren't pros supposed to protect people? Why would he do that to his own son? Mirio tried his best to not yell, but the onslaught of emotions flooding his mind and soul became too overwhelming to ignore. sir, and Toshinori tried to calm the team down while Tsukachi quickly tried to explain his earlier comment. As I said, we don't know for sure if that's the case. He explained. I'm merely making conjectures as to why Aiza's own father, who must have been contacted by the police at some point, wouldn't have gone to the police about it and have them issue a missing persons report to begin with. But after looking into his own past history and what he did prior to becoming a pro, I'm starting to think that my first theory may very well be our smoking gun. Everyone fell silent as they stared at the man in stunned silence. His past history? Mirio whispered. Tsukachi clicked the remote again, and several screenshots of criminal records and reports of varying dates and degrees, all with Hisashi's name and personal information on them. Mirio's eyes grew wide at what he was seeing. Hisashi was a criminal? Before becoming a pro hero, Hisashi had a rather extensive history of crime and villainous activities, mostly ranging from minor misdemeanors to aggravated assault. But despite the long list of offenses he's committed in the past, starting from when he was in middle school, he was somehow able to train at a hero academy and obtain his license to become a pro hero. While it's not ideal to allow someone with any kind of record to become a hero, the school and agency he studied and interned under must have seen potential in him and decided to give him a chance at redeeming himself, and to be honest, it's probably a good thing for someone who was once a villain to turn their life around and actually do some good in the world. Toshinori hummed. That's actually not a bad idea. It's always good to give people a second chance, he stated, sounding confident and positive about the prospect of allowing past villains to right their wrongs. Sir, on the other hand, seemed to disagree with his former partner. While I do see the practicality of giving a former criminal a chance at becoming a hero and being a productive member of society, I don't think it was wise of his alma mater and intern site to brush off his criminal history and give him access to the same rights and privileges as pro heroes without having him screened and monitored. At the very least, his agency should have given him a trial period to ensure that he was fit to work as a hero. While the two men argued back and forth, Mirio just sat there and took all of this in. Even after nearly 3 years of studying at UA, he had no idea it was possible for a villain with any sort of criminal record to be given permission to attend a hero academy and be given a license to practice heroism. Sure, the topic has been mentioned in passing, it has never been a big enough subject to be considered worth learning. Honestly, that was one of the very scarce flaws Mirio believed UA could work on improving. Tsukachi, becoming a bit impatient, calmly quieted everyone down so he could continue with the meeting. While I understand that you may have different opinions on the topic of allowing a villain to become a hero, that's not the point of me bringing this up. He clicked on the remote again to change the screen, and a different image appeared. This one looked to be fairly recent, at least a month old. As you may know, the Yakuza, also known as the Shai Hasaikai, have joined allegiance with the League of Villains not too long ago, and while it's unprecedented for large and powerful villain organizations to team up while having differing goals and opinions, it's quite dangerous, and it will only lead to more trouble for both the pros and the police force if things get out of control. In the case of Hisashi Midoriya, though he seemingly abandoned his criminal past and has since turned a new leaf, it's highly suspicious that he's more or less gone missing with no trace of his whereabouts at the same time that his wife was killed and his son disappeared. It's even more suspicious when, based on the reports we've gathered from the Yakuza's activities and movements, there's a possibility that Hisashi has been working as an associate or even a third party for the Yakuza. The man caught a glimpse of the look of shock on Mirio's face before continuing. But as I said, this is only speculation and not actual facts. We don't have any proof that Hisashi is responsible for his son's kidnapping, as well as proof that he's been working for the Yakuza or the League while carrying out his duties as a pro hero. But given what we've managed to uncover, it's highly likely that he's been working as a villain all along and his status as a pro was merely a cover-up. The room fell silent after that. Mirio stared at the table in stunned silence, his expression hard and his fists clenched into tight balls in his lap. As much as he wanted to believe that Aiza's father hasn't turned back to his villainous ways and has simply taken time off from his duties without actually stating the fact, he can't help the sickening feeling in his gut that the boy's own father could be the reason for his son becoming a victim to the League and Hasaikai. It would also explain why none of the pros or officers recognized Aizu or even knew that he was ever missing, which was even more appalling to think of. And to go missing at such a young age, only 3 years old, it left an acidic taste in his mouth. So, what do you propose we do about this? Are you suggesting we launch a separate investigation on him and track him down and bring him in for extensive questioning? Sir demanded in a stern, cold tone of voice while adjusting his glasses. Tsukachi hummed in response, a confident smile on his face. I couldn't have said it better myself. While it's only speculation, with everything we've gathered, it's enough to place him on the top priority list as a primary potential suspect, especially if he's been working for the Yakuza while under the guise of a pro-hero. So, yes, I am launching a separate investigation to find Hisashi along with tracking down and detaining the 2 villain factions. I'll also be bringing this up with the Commission. I'm certain they'll be more than happy with helping us track him down, especially if it involves the League of Villains and Shai Hasaikai, who are responsible for the captivity and torture of a young child. That was relieving for Mirio to hear, as it was for Sir and Toshinori, who have grown quite fond of the boy, and having his father located and brought forward for questioning for his actions, or inactions, would remove so much weight off of their shoulders. Mirio didn't care how long it took. He would make sure Aizu got justice for what his father might have done, for what Shigaraki and Overhaul did. Still, he just couldn't shake away this relentless nagging feeling inside. A feeling that despite the reassuring promise of finding Aizu's father and having him explain his reason. Now then, on to the next point of discussion, Tsukachi stated before switching to a different image on the projector. As I mentioned before, there's been a new development in the case involving the Yakuza. They've been heavily suspected of manufacturing and selling illegal substances for quite some time, until the last mission involving infiltrating the Hasaikai's hideout, or at least one of their hideouts, which turned out to be a lab where they kept kidnapped pros and used them for experiments. These drugs have been found circulating throughout the underworld and black market. They've also been suspected of accumulating funds from various outsiders and dealers, including one of the dealers we believe to be working for the League prior to their allegiance. He clicked the remote and a new image came up on the screen, which turned out to be a police report and a few photographs of a crime scene. A few days ago, there was an incident involving a group of thugs starting a fight with another group of thugs, a possible turf dispute from the sound of it. Luckily, a fellow pro-hero and a trusted associate of ours, Fat Gum, happened to be on patrol with one of his sidekicks at the time, and they were able to put a stop to the scuffle before anyone got seriously hurt. There was a bit of a pause, and Mirio had a bad feeling surging through his stomach. He also didn't like where this conversation was going. What happened? He asked. While Fat Gum was able to capture most of the thugs, one of them shot an unlucky civilian standing nearby with some sort of bullet that caused her quirk to stop working. This shocked everyone in the room, but nobody interrupted the man, instead choosing to hear the rest of what he had to say. The thug who'd shot the woman with the quirk-damaging bullet had also managed to escape capture, but thankfully, Fat Gum's sidekick was able to chase after him and even cornered him in an alleyway long enough for police to arrive. When backup finally arrived, some witnesses stated that the man injected himself with a drug that rapidly enhanced his quirk, which allowed him to heavily increase the strength and endurance of his quirk. Luckily, they were able to detain him despite some of the officers getting injured in the process. What of the civilian who was shot? Is she okay? Toshinori asked, obviously concerned with the idea of a pro-hero not being able to use their quirk anymore, which reminded him too much of his own situation. But the reassuring smile on Tsukachi's face put his mind at ease. She's recovered amazingly. Her body wasn't damaged by the shot, and despite her not being able to use her quirk, turns out it was only temporary. Her quirk didn't suffer any lasting effects, and she said she was able to use it like normal the next morning. Everyone collectively sighed with relief, but the tension in the air didn't die down. And I assume you were able to gather samples of the drugs used for both canceling the woman's quirk and enhancing the thug's quirk? Sir questioned. Tsukachi hummed. Yes, we actually were able to confiscate their weapons and the illegal substances they were carrying during the dispute, though they refused to give us anything in the way of useful information or evidence to prove that he and his friends were working for the Hasaikai. The remaining drugs, bullets, and witness testimonies was more than enough. Tsukachi paused for a moment as he gazed at the pro-heroes and then turned to look at Mirio. Something told the teen that whatever Tsukachi was about to tell him was anything but good, but he still wasn't prepared for what he was fixing to say. And to this day, those words would haunt him for as long as he would remember. After taking the drugs and bullets to the lab and having them tested, we found human blood and cells within the bullets. And upon further analysis of the cells, we came to find that the blood found within the bullets and Aizu's blood were a match. It felt as though all of the air in the room was replaced with lead, making it difficult to breathe. Mirio felt his whole body lock up, his eyes widening from the sudden shock of what he just heard. Then, something flashed in his mind that caused all the air in his lungs to suddenly disappear upon realizing something very crucial. The day he found and rescued Aizu. The day he battled against the leaders of the League of Villains and the Shai Hasaikai. The words Overhaul spoke to him as he was fighting to protect both himself and Aizu. I took it upon myself to research and perform tests on him so I could mold him into the perfect tool, and thanks to his lack of a quirk, he has no means of defying me. His body began to shake and tremble, a cold sheet of sweat covering his body as all the color seemed to drain from his face. I'll continue to salvage Aizu for what he's worth until I've managed to create the perfect product. The image of Aizu's heavily scarred arms, legs and torso, especially his torso, flooded his mind as he began to recollect the way the scars on his chest and stomach looked so intricate and intentional, likely caused by being cut open with a scaffold. Overhaul, that monster, had not only used medical tools to surgically extract pieces of Aizu to use for his sick and twisted experiments, he likely also used his own quirk on the child to achieve this objective as well. A wave of nausea overcame Mirio at the mere thought. No. No way. That's... Mirio remembered the day he stood before his mentors, All Might and Sir Night-Eye. The latter explained to him the details of the mission he was to be a part of, as well as the details of Overhaul and Shigaraki's quirks. His name is Kai Chisaki. He is the young leader of the Shai Hasaikai, and his quirk is called Overhaul. It's an ability to dismantle and reform anything and anyone. Then, of course, there's Shigaraki, current leader of the League of Villains. His quirk, from what we've gathered, allows him to decompose anything he touches, including people. A quirk that can decompose anything and anyone, and a quirk that can dismantle and reform, huh? Sounds pretty scary. But don't worry, sir, I'll make sure to keep my distance if I run into either of these guys. He remembered being so chipper and carefree about the whole thing, despite the slight tinge of fear coursing through him. But now, Mirio couldn't stop shaking, he couldn't stop his mind from racing. I thought Overhaul was bluffing when he said all those things. I knew what he was capable of doing with that quirk of his, and yet, I never once thought that all those things he said he'd done, all that talk about using Aizu as a tool and salvaging him, I never once thought that they were true. His fists clenched so hard and tight that the knuckles turned white, and his teeth gritted down so hard that his jaw started to ache. Aizu is quirkless. This is a known fact. And while it's very uncommon for someone to be born without a quirk, the idea of a quirkless person being used as a resource for a special kind of drug that can destroy a person's quirk, albeit temporarily, isn't too far-fetched from what I'd expected someone like Overhaul to achieve. Tsukachi could practically feel the tension in the air becoming heavier by the second. Those bastards! Toshinori cursed through clenched teeth. They were planning to turn Aizu's body into bullets to sell on the black market. Sir sat there in tense silence, doing his best to keep his composure. Even Bubble Girl couldn't help it as she covered her mouth with a gloved hand. Not even seasoned professionals were immune to learning such disturbing news. The man's words cut deep into Mirio like a razor cutting into flesh. It stung like nothing he's ever felt. Planning is an understatement. Sir interjected. They were already doing it from the start. Though how long this has been going on for is still unclear, it's safe to say they've been using Aizu as a guinea pig and were harvesting his blood in order to produce these so-called quirk-destroying bullets. Toshinori started to cough, but quickly got a hold of himself before he started coughing up blood. I'm still not sure how they were able to use blood from a quirkless child to create bullets that can temporarily destroy a person's quirk. He turned to Sir for his opinion, which he was happy to give. With my understanding, I believe there was a way for Chisaki to synthesize samples of Aizu's blood, so that when injected into a person, it could simulate the body of a quirkless person, the non-existence of a quirk. He adjusted his glasses with a heavy sigh. At least, that's my understanding of the whole thing. Tsukachi hummed as he glanced over at Mirio, who was still staring at the table in stunned silence, the look of pure shock and horror evident on his face. Yes. It is possible, though we still don't have all the answers yet. Which is why we're going to keep gathering more intel and hopefully we'll find out more about Overhaul's plans. The sudden clatter from a chair being knocked over and hitting the floor cut the man off, as well as causing everyone in the room to jolt from the sudden noise. Mirio was now standing up, his chair laying on the floor, and the look of determination on his face. I swear, no matter what it takes, I'll do what I can to help locate Hisashi and make him pay for what he's done. I'll put an end to Overhaul's evil plan once and for all, and I'll make sure this never happens to another innocent person ever again. You have my word. Everyone in the room was now staring at the teen in wide-eyed shock. The tension in the room shifted a bit, but for a different reason. Sensing Mirio's unwavering tenacity, Sir cleared his throat to get his attention. As much as I admire your dedication and perseverance, Mirio, that won't be necessary. Mirio whipped his head around and stared at his mentor in shock. Sir held up a hand to silence him before explaining. If the circumstances were different and Aizu was still in their custody, then I would most likely consider keeping you on board for this case, but as it stands right now, you have a different role to fulfill. He offered the teen a smile. Taking care of the child and making sure he's safe is your only responsibility in this case. Leave finding Hisashi Midoriya and putting a stop to the League and Hasaikai to us? Mirio was stunned for a moment by the man's words, unsure of what to say. He knew that Sir was right and that his sole duty aside from attending his normal classes and training was looking after Aizu, but on the other hand, he didn't feel right sitting out on such an important mission, especially if it involves Aizu's father. He's right, young Tagata. Toshinori stated. We'll take care of moving the investigation forward, as well as tracking down Hisashi and bringing him here for questioning. You worry about little Aizu. Both Bubble Girl and Tsukachi nodded in agreement. As much as Mirio wanted to disagree, he knew they were right. Aizu was his number one concern, and would remain as such until the villains were no longer a threat to him, and even then, Mirio was seriously contemplating something he worried the adults would deny him the right to. With a heavy sigh and a nod, Mirio looked at Tsukachi and said, Okay. I'm counting on you guys to see this through. He even managed a smile despite the weight he felt in his heart. The detective smiled and nodded back. Then it's settled. I'll get started on recruiting some more help for this case. I'll leave contacting the commissioners. To you and your associates, Sir Knight. Sir gave a curt nod. He then turned to Mirio, and with a serious gaze, said, Sometime in the next few days to come, I'm going to need to sit and talk with Aizu again. We need some more information from him, and if it comes down to it, I'll see about having you present during questioning. Mirio nodded. That's all for now. Thank you all for taking the time to come out here, today. You're all dismissed. Mirio was quiet even as he was led through the hall and down the stairs to the lobby. Tsukachi assured him and his colleagues that he would get to work on refreshing the case, now that they had all the new information at their disposal. Toshinori and Sir thanked him and proceeded to walk out of the police station with Mirio in tow. As they waited for a cab, Sir could tell that something was eating away at his pupil, likely having to do with the discussion during the meeting. It must have been quite hard for him to accept. Without moving from his spot, he said in a soft tone, We're going to get to the bottom of this, Mirio. The teen glanced at the man. We'll track down Hisashi and make him answer for what he's been doing this whole time, his involvement in all of this, and we will put a stop to the League and Hasaikai. You have my word. Mirio, though unsure of himself, nodded at his mentor's words. But Sir and Toshinori could tell something was weighing heavy on his mind. Tell us what's the matter, young Tagata? Toshinori insisted, not wanting to see his successor wallowing in self-loathing. Taking a long, deep breath, Mirio turned to face the men and said, Aizu? He has no other family, does he? They weren't expecting him to ask such a question, but Sir nodded his head. As far as we know, no, he doesn't. It's been almost a month since he was brought into our care, so someone who is a relative should have come forward by now. Mirio lowered his gaze. I see. Is that what's been bothering you? Sir questioned, sensing that there was more to the teen's concerns than he was letting on. Mirio remained silent, unsure of how to respond. The silence stretched on for a good few seconds before Toshinori broke it again. You really love Aizu, don't you? This caught both Mirio and Sir by surprise, but the latter also understood where he was going with this. Mirio, unable to find his voice, stared at the lanky man for a few seconds longer before tentatively nodding in response. There was no point in trying to lie when it was the truth. He did love Aizu. Toshinori smiled. I'm not surprised, my boy. Anybody that knows you could probably tell. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Aizu loves you too. You're the only person aside from a select few that he trusts no matter what, and the fact he calls you his brother should be proof enough. Mirio felt his heart warm up at the thought of Aizu seeing him as his older brother, and truth be told, he thought of Aizu as his little brother many times. I've never felt so protective over someone like I do with Aizu. It's almost like this strange, powerful feeling of, well, I guess it's similar to how a parent would feel for their child, but I don't know if that's the right way to describe it. Sir smirked. I think it fits. Mirio let out an airy laugh. Ah yeah. Well, I think you're doing a wonderful job fulfilling that role for Aizu. No matter the circumstances, he sees you as his brother, and there's no reason for anyone to dispute otherwise. Toshinori stated, earning a nod of approval from his former sidekick. This made Mirio feel 10 times better than he did before. Relief instantly flooded his mind and put any worries he felt to rest, knowing his mentors saw nothing wrong with his growing attachment over the boy, as long as it was healthy and mutual. Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate everything you've done for me, for Aizu, Mirio said with genuine sincerity. The men smiled at their pupil. Not a problem, my boy, Toshinori assured. Sir nodded in agreement. Things were starting to look a little brighter for everyone, even if it seemed like it wasn't. Mirio would put his worries in the back of his mind for the time, and focus on what was important, which happened to be waiting for him back at UA. The first sound to catch Mirio's ears was the high-pitched squeals and giggles that he could only recognize as Aizu's. Mirio, despite the feeling of disturbance lingering in the back of his mind from earlier, couldn't help the smile that pulled on his lips as he entered the common area of Class 1's dorm building. Aizu was currently floating a few feet above some of the other students. The child was giggling his head off as he made swimming motions through what appeared to be several large hula hoops which were also floating in the air, courtesy of Uraraka and Momo. Some of the other students stood below him, laughing and smiling as they cheered him on and encouraged him to swim through the hoops. It looked to be some sort of game they came up with, which honestly looked like a lot of fun. But upon spotting the teen standing in the foyer, Aizu's squeaky giggles turned into a sudden gasp. Miri! Aizu exclaimed loudly, catching the attention of the others, as he attempted to turn himself right side up while still floating. Look, Miri and I look. I'm flying, Miri, I can fly. Mirio laughed aloud. That's so cool, Aizu. He came closer and held his hands up to the boy. Come here, Aizu, I'll catch you. Aizu smiled and proceeded to make his way over to where Mirio was. Meanwhile, Uraraka stood nearby with her fingers a few centimeters apart without the pads of her fingers touching, wanting to make sure the child was within grabbing distance before releasing him from her quirk, while also allowing him to float down ever so slowly. Steady, and release. She touched her fingers together, releasing the boy from her quirk, causing him to be pulled down by gravity and into Mirio awaiting arms. This also resulted in the hula hoops falling back down and landing all over the common area, not that anybody minded. Aizu squealed happily while wrapping his arms around Mirio's neck. You caught me, Miri and I. Ah, I sure did. Mirio chirped while hugging the child close. Did you have fun while I was gone? He asked while holding Aizu to his chest. Ever since the meeting, he's felt so starved of cuddles from his favorite little brother, which he was certain the boy was happy to provide. I had lots of fun. I got to show everyone my quirk notes and drawings, and they said they were super cool and creative. They were all like, whoa, so cool. Then we had a big dance party and I got to dance with Mina and Oka and Sue and Kyuka. The music that played was a bit loud, but it was super fun. Then Yuga made Bayig sparkles with his cool belt thingy. It was like flash, like a big, sparkly flashlight. It was so bright and twinkly. And then AG played superhero with me and I got to take him down with my super move. He was all, "Rar, I'm gonna eat everyone." And then I came out and went, "I'll stop you." And then I took him out in one hit. Mirio chuckled while nuzzling his face against Aizu's, causing him to giggle. "Wow, that sounds like so much fun, Aizu. Wish I was here to join you, maybe next time." He then spotted Mina coming over to him with her phone in hand and a big grin on her pink face. "Wanna see the videos I took? They're so cute." She scrolled through the gallery in her phone while gushing over how adorable Aizu was and how he was such a good boy. Mirio smiled and nodded while Aizu continued to hug him around his neck. Once she found the video she was looking for, Mina hit play on the video and held the phone up for Mirio to watch. The first video was of their impromptu dance party. Aizu was holding Azui's hands while dancing along with the frog girl, and everyone else, well, aside from Tokoyami, Todoroki and Bakugo, was dancing to the music and having a great time. In another video, Kirishima was pretending to be a big, scary villain while some of the others were hiding under a pillow and blanket fort and crying for help, only for their hero, Minimight, to come to the rescue and take down the evildoer. Kirishima was doing a great job at portraying a villain without coming across as mean or scary. Then, there was a video of Aizu bouncing up and down and clapping his hands while watching Momo use her quirk to create the same hula hoops that were floating in the air just a moment ago, and Uraraka used her quirk to make them and Aizu float in the air above everyone, the boy laughing and giggling giddily the whole time. The rest of the videos were short and rather miscellaneous, but were nonetheless adorable. Unfortunately, there looked to be too many for Mirio to watch them all, which Mina was happy to send him a message with all the videos linked. Mina put her phone back in her back pocket before reaching a hand out to ruffle Aizu's hair playfully. He was snuggled into Mirio with his face tucked against his neck, appearing to fall asleep. "You should definitely bring him by more. He's such an awesome kid to be around, and I think he really enjoys hanging out with us." The others nodded in agreement. Mirio, still holding a now sleeping Aizu in his arms, was silent for a moment as he remembered what Tsukachi had said about Aizu's father, Hisashi, and how he supposedly knew about Aizu being taken away by villains, how he likely turned his back on his own child and seemingly disappeared without a trace. How could someone call themselves a hero, no, a man, if they willingly abandon their only child and leave everything behind while possibly being affiliated with the very people they're supposed to be protecting people like his son from? How could Hisashi abandon his old villainous ways to become a hero, only to then turn his back on his family and join sides with the Yakuza? How could such a thoughtless, selfish, inconsiderate person ever be the father of such a sweet, kind, selfless, and all-around pure soul like Aizu? Mirio? "Hey Mirio, are you okay?" Mirio was suddenly ripped from his thoughts as he turned to face Mina and Uraraka, who were both staring up at him with concern. "You were spacing out there for a moment. Is everything okay?" Shaking his head to clear his lingering thoughts, Mirio smiled at the girls and nodded. Yep, I'm totally fine." He turned to look at Aizu, who was lightly snoring against his neck. A tender smile pulled against Mirio's lips as he brushed a soothing hand along the boy's head, causing him to let out a content sigh. "I'm just fine. Just have a lot on my mind, is all." While continuing to stroke Aizu's hair, Mirio turned to the others and said, "I can't thank you guys enough for looking after him for me. I'll make it up to you for sure." Kirishima waved his hand dismissively with a grin. "Nah man, it's all good. No need to repay us," he assured. "The little dude is a riot to have around, and he's a ton of fun too." Some of the others nodded in agreement. Kaminari snickered while pointing to Bakugo, who was sitting on one of the couches. He even managed to win over Bakubro. The little guy has a real talent there. This earned him a slightly annoyed glare from the blonde, but it wasn't powerful enough to make Kaminari cower away. Mirio let out an amused huff. "Hee, well that's good to hear." He bounced Aizu lightly so he could adjust his hold on him. "Well, I should get going. Gotta make dinner for me and Aizu, after he finishes his nap, of course. Almost everyone came over to bid the two goodbye after Mirio collected Aizu's bag and stood by the front door. Don't be a stranger, you hear? Eri reminded him politely. Yeah man, don't hesitate to come to us if you need anything. Siro added. As fellow students of this esteemed hero academy, it is our obligation to assist those who are in need, and that includes our seniors and any civilian. Ida stated in his usual serious tone, though there was a hint of tenderness behind his words as he sounded very pleased to have Aizu spend time with them again. It made Mirio feel a lot better knowing that there were others willing to welcome Aizu into their circle, making him feel included. Thank you guys again. For everything. With that, he turned and made his way down the walkway towards the dorm building. Aizu was still sound asleep in his arms. His little arms wrapped loosely around his neck with his face snuggled against his shirt collar. As he continued to walk while taking his time getting to his destination, Mirio gently tightened his grip on the child while recalling the words Tsukachi spoke during the meeting. As the memories of the meeting flashed through his mind, Mirio made yet another silent promise to himself, and this time, he was more determined than ever to fulfill this promise, especially with everything he's learned. I swear, I will do everything within my power, with every fiber of my being, with every ounce of strength I have, I will give Aizu everything he's been robbed of in his life. Everything he's missed out on, every experience he's never had the chance to have, every joy he's never been given the chance to bask in, I will give him all of it. No matter what it takes, I will give him everything he's never had. He tried to fight back the tears while cradling Aizu to his chest, his lips brushing the boy's forehead in a tender kiss. I swear to you, Aizu, I'll be the best big brother you could ever ask for. I'll give you the most precious thing you were robbed of, and I swear to give back to you. A single tear managed to roll down his cheek as the next words left his lips in a whisper, but held so much weight. A family. Yuga Aoyama. So, sparkly. Aizu's adorably curious-filled voice chirped out as he gazed in amazement around the dazzling, sparkling, twinkling lights that permeated every inch of the blonde's dorm room. It was a relatively quiet and uneventful Sunday afternoon when Aizu caught a glimpse of the glittering twinkles that were the precursor to Aoyama's overwhelmingly glamorous private space. Thankfully, he was kind enough to allow the small boy to enter his room to get a better look, and the look of sheer amazement and wonder on the child's face was enough to make Aoyama's chest puff up with pride and self-importance. Not only did the boy's reactions to his glitzy decor rub Aoyama's ego in just the right way, but he also had a soft spot for the child despite his vain personality, because, well, who wouldn't be enamored by such an adorable, sweet, and innocent child like Aizu? He was such an angel, it was impossible to not fall in love with him. Aoyama let out a soft, airy chuckle at the look of wonderment and adoration in Aizu's dazzling green eyes, which were the size of dinner plates while gazing all around the room and taking in all the various things in it. Primarily at the tall suit of armor that caught the boy's attention. I take it my sparkling, spectacular private space is to your liking, Petit Lapin? He asked with a playful hint in his tone while giving a twinkling wink. Aizu giggled with a blush and said, "Aha! It's so pretty! I've never seen so many sparkles before. Not even during nighttime when I see stars in the sky, and there are a lot of stars." Aoyama chuckled pridefully while crouching down to Aizu's level as he petted the boy's fluffy hair. "It pleases me to see how much you love my room, Petit Lapin." He then noticed Aizu staring at his torso, specifically where his navel was, before gingerly reaching his hand out to tentatively touch Aoyama's stomach. "What is it, Aizu?" Aoyama questioned, his voice losing some of its pompous tone. He was somewhat caught off guard by the child's sudden curiosity and never having been touched in such a manner. Not that it was taken as offensive or inappropriate, but rather because of the fact that Aizu's hand was dangerously close to his navel, which was covered by the belt he kept hidden under his clothes. "I've seen you during practice," Aizu explained in a gentle and shy voice while continuing to carefully map out the belt with his hand. "I always see you activate your quirk with your belly button, and you always wear that weird belt thingy." Before Aoyama could respond or even react, Aizu lifted up the blonde's elegant white blouse, revealing his navel covered by the belt. Aizu tilted his head curiously. How come you gotta wear a belt when you use your quirk, Yuga? Does it make your sparkles more sparkly or something? Aoyama, despite the sudden question, couldn't help the smile that spread over his face at the child's innocent question. He sat on the floor cross-legged while letting Aizu come closer so he could get a better look at his belt. He didn't feel like he was in danger of being ridiculed or criticized for having to wear the device, and Aizu's curious nature helped Aoyama feel less self-conscious of his genetic flaw. Actually, little Aizu, the reason I have to wear this belt is because of a birth defect I got when I was born. When I first manifested my quirk, my beams would often leak from my navel, and because I had no control over my quirk yet, Mama and Papa were worried about my safety and health. So, they had this belt custom made for me, so now, I don't have to worry about sparkly beams spewing from my belly. He smiled fondly when Aizu crawled onto his lap and gently touched the gold ridges of the belt's facet, gentle curiosity emanating from his touch, as if he were handling an injured bird. So, you can't use your quirk without this belt? Aoyama's smile faltered slightly. Unfortunately, no. Luckily, the school allows me to wear this during training and even allowed me to wear it during the sports festival. But still, his delicate fingertips brushed over the smooth face of the belt. I often wish I could be like everyone else. Aizu looked up at the blonde with a confused expression. What do you mean, Yuga? I've never been very good at feeling confident. I often feel like I'm different from everyone else, and it makes me feel so lonely. I want to be like the others without having to worry about being a burden. This was the first time Aizu had ever seen the normally lively and proud teen look so vulnerable and sad. It caused a pang of remorse to pulse through the child's chest. When an idea popped into his head, he quickly scrambled out of Aoyama's lap and grabbed one of the dozens of mirrors before shoving it into his face. Not expecting the boy to do something like that, Aoyama jolted in surprise before looking at the boy in confusion. Oh my! What is this about, little one? The child smiled brightly while still holding the mirror out and said, I always see you looking into the mirror with a great big smile on your face. You always look so happy seeing yourself, Yuga, and you looked really sad. So, I want to make you happy again by showing you what you look like. He explained innocently. Don't be sad, Yuga. You're amazing and cool, just like everyone else, including Miri and I. He said the older teen's name with so much pride. It's okay to be different, 'cause if you were the same as everyone else, you would be boring, and you're not boring, Yuga. You're you. It took Aoyama a moment to process what Aizu was saying, but as soon as his words finally started to make sense, he smiled sweetly at the boy before taking the handheld mirror from him, setting it down and wrapping his arms around the small boy while pulling him into a tender hug. You truly are one of a kind, Petit Lapin. In fact, you're an absolute ange. Aoyama praised while pulling the child closer so he was settled back into his lap while still hugging him. Aizu snuggled against his chest before saying, what's an ange? And also, what does, that other word mean? Aoyama chuckled warmly before responding. Why, it means angel. And Petit Lapin mean little bunny, which is exactly what you are. Aizu, now understanding the teen's French terms used to describe him, giggled happily before returning the hug by wrapping his arms around Aoyama's neck. He wasn't used to having younger siblings, let alone dealing with small children, but Aoyama would gladly sacrifice every valuable possession he owned if it meant making Aizu happy, because this child was worth so much more than all the glamour, money, and notoriety in the world. Mina Shido. Look, Mina, look. Did you see that? That bad guy went flying. Mina giggled at the boy's reaction to the scene playing on the TV while he pointed to the screen with astonishment. I sure did, Aizu. That guy didn't stand a chance, huh? Aizu giggled with a nod as he continued to focus on the TV. They were both currently sitting in the living room together while watching a kid-friendly anime which was, of course, hero-themed. Aizu sat next to Mina on the couch while occasionally bouncing up and down in his spot whenever a particularly exciting scene came on, and he would always talk about the different quirks each hero was using in great detail. It was amazing just how much the child knew about quirks despite not having any powers himself. Much like with the other students in her class, Mina had grown quite close to the small boy and had developed a sisterly bond with Aizu. Mina loved having him in her bedroom where they would get into all kinds of things, such as painting his nails after watching her touch up her polish, doing his makeup and making him pretty like her, styling his hair with hair bows and floral clips, and letting him play dress up with her colorful and stylish clothes and accessories, even going as far as to pretend to be a fashion show judge while praising him with claps and cheers. While some people would consider it weird for a little boy to do things like wear makeup, hair clips, and frilly hats and neck scarves, Mina, as well as the other girls and even some of the guys, they also began to participate in playing with Aizu during his fashion shows, didn't care if Aizu dressed up in girly clothes or wore makeup. It was all for fun anyways, and even if it wasn't, who cares? He's 5. It would be cruel to tell Aizu he couldn't play dress up with girls' clothes because he's a boy. The kid only got to be a kid once, and as long as it made him happy, who was Mina or anyone else to tell him to stop? Mina heard Aizu let out another bubbly giggle after a particularly funny scene played out on the TV, and Mina just couldn't help herself. She reached over and scooped the little boy into her lap, making him squeak in surprise as he was settled into her lap with his back pressed against her chest. "Oh my goodness, Aizu. How is it that you're so cute? Your cuteness is just impossible. It's a mystery, I say." This made Aizu giggled even more as he turned around in her hold and stared back at her with a huge grin on his face. "Hee, Miri and I says I'm cute too. And so does Niji. They both said I'm too cute." Mina gushed at the boy's words and nuzzled her face against his, making him laugh even more. "Well, I'd say they're correct. You are just too cute for us to handle. I think your cuteness can be used as a weapon against the villains." Aizu shook his head playfully. "Nah, the villains are too powerful. I can't stop them myself, and being cute won't be enough to stop them either. Besides, I'm not that cute." Mina smirked playfully, taking the child's last comment as a challenge to prove him wrong in her own special way. "Oh, I beg to differ. How can anyone resist your adorable smile and laughter?" She then started to lightly scribble her fingers against the child's sides, causing him to burst into screaming laughter from the sudden tickle attack, his little hands trying to bat hers away while squirming around in her lap. Mina tickled him some more until he was laying on his back on the couch with her hovering above him, a huge, triumphant smile on her face. "You see, Aizu? You're just too gosh darn cute. Villains wouldn't stand a chance against all of your cuteness." She teased before leaning down and attacking him with butterfly kisses that she planted all over his face, neck, and even onto his now exposed tummy where she would blow raspberries. This sent Aizu into another fit of hysterical squeals and giggles. The playful assault suddenly stopped, and Aizu was once again scooped up by Mina, who cuddled him close to her chest while repositioning them on the couch, so she was now leaning back against the arm of the couch. Aizu let out a content sigh as he snuggled closer to Mina, burying his face against the crook of her neck. He loved cuddling and being cuddled so much, no matter who was cuddling him. He craved the closeness of another person and enjoyed the feeling of being held. It made him feel safe and secure. Having lived most of his life locked away from the world while being brutally abused, mistreated, and essentially used as a guinea pig for the League's and Hasaikai's sick and twisted experiments, Aizu had never known what being hugged was like, or at least he did, but had long since forgotten the feeling of being held and loved. So to say that Aizu would immediately jump at the chance to receive cuddles from anyone was an understatement. A few moments passed by as the two fell into a comfortable silence while the TV was still on. Then, Mina noticed Aizu stir in her grasp and looked to see him staring up at her, or more specifically, at the top of her head. "What's up, Buttercup?" she asked while booping his nose playfully. "Are those real?" he asked while pointing at the pair of horns poking out from Mina's short, fluffy pink hair. "Oh, you mean my horns?" She sat up a bit while Aizu was still wrapped in her arms. He nodded his head yes. She smiled and said, "You want to see them, Aizu?" The boy's eyes lit up and grew to the size of dinner plates as he nodded his head frantically. Mina laughed softly before leaning her head forward a bit so her matching yellow horns were close enough for the child to get a better look. Aizu peered at the protruding horns with intense curiosity and intrigue. He wanted to touch them, but was worried it would hurt her if he did so. Luckily for him, Mina noticed this and asked gently, "Do you want to touch them, Aizu?" "It's okay if you want to." You won't hurt me. Just be careful, okay? The boy smiled after being granted permission before reaching a tentative hand up and carefully poking the strange appendage sticking out from the top of her head. It felt strange, but it was a good kind of strange. When he pressed on it some more, he softly gasped in surprise when he made the horn move. Mina laughed softly while watching Aizu's curious gaze staring up at the girl's horns while he continued to gently prod them. Pretty cool, huh? Aizu nodded. Aha. So cool and so cute. Your horns are all twisty and small, like a ram. I like rams, they're really cute, especially when they're babies. He then buried his fingers into her fluffy pink hair while smiling brightly. And your hair is so soft and pink and really, really fluffy. Mina gushed at the boy before pulling him closer and nuzzling his face, making him giggle. Ah, thanks, Aizu. You're so sweet, and your hair is soft and fluffy too. We're hair twins. Aizu giggled even more, his round, freckled cheeks stained pink from blushing, as Mina continued to snuggle and coo at him about how cute he was, while Aizu continued to compliment Mina on her horns, her fluffy hair, and even her pink skin, saying how pink looked really good on her. The kids' show still playing on the TV was long abandoned as Mina and Aizu were more focused on complimenting each other and calling each other cute. As much as Mina loved being complimented and being called cute, she believed that Aizu was much cuter and would fight anyone who disagreed. After all, only Aizu gets to be the cutest. See you, Azui. Having two younger siblings of her own, Azui was no stranger to looking after someone like Aizu, who was around the same age as her little brother and sister. Combined with her experience of taking care of her siblings and her calm, level-headed and laid-back personality and demeanor, Azui was perfect for the task of looking after little Aizu, who seemed completely enthralled by Azui and her frog-like appearance and abilities. Most of the time, which was almost all the time, Aizu was an absolute angel around her. He was well-behaved, did as he was told, and even made more of an effort to say her preferred nickname, Tsu, since he knew she liked to be called that, which Azui thought was very sweet and considerate. But, like with any toddler, Aizu was prone to having his off days, which often resulted in him either being completely withdrawn from others or throwing sudden temper tantrums when things didn't go his way, or a mix of both. Today was one of those days. It all started the night before, when Aizu had woken up from a really bad nightmare and he had a hard time falling back asleep. Then, later on in the day, he refused to take a nap out of fear that that same nightmare would come back, and because he wanted to prove that he was a big boy who didn't need naps. Finally, Mirio got called in by Sir Night Eye and was told to come in for work, which greatly upset Aizu since he wanted to spend time with his big brother. So now, Aizu was not only very upset and angry with not getting to be with Mirio, but he was also tired and cranky from not getting enough sleep and from not taking his scheduled nap. Not a good combination. Everyone tried to coax the child into hanging out with them, but Aizu refused, choosing instead to sit by himself in the corner of the common area with his little arms crossed over his chest and the biggest pout anyone has ever seen. They tried everything, offering to give him snacks and juice? Inviting him to watch an all-night movie? Nope. Asking him to play video games or play outside? Negative. They even offered to cook his favorite dish, katsudon, for dinner, and he still refused. They could tell something was wrong, but unfortunately, they had no clue what could be the issue, and none of them knew what else they could possibly do to try and help. That is, until Azui stepped in and worked her magic. Aizu, she croaked gently while crouching down to Aizu's level. The boy gave her the same silent treatment he gave to others before her. This didn't deter her as she reached out to the child. Come here, Aizu, she murmured softly before pulling the child closer to her. Aizu let out a tiny whine, which then turned into an exhausted whimper, as he was lifted from his spot on the floor and pulled close to her chest while being cradled in her arms. Surprisingly, he didn't try and fight her off or push her away, likely being too tired to do so. But the pout was still present on his features, a look that most definitely did not suit the boy. Most of the others looked on to see what the frog-like girl was planning to do, worried that even she wouldn't be able to help. But then, they were a little shocked by what she did. Azui began to sing a soft lullaby while swaying side to side, with Aizu still clung to her torso. The song was a simple children's lullaby about a lonely snake that made friends with a tree frog. It was a song that she would often sing to her little brother and sister whenever they woke up from a nightmare and refused to go back to sleep, and that was all Aizu needed, was to sleep. He was tired, but also scared to sleep, but once he heard Ajui's surprisingly soothing voice sing the melody to him, he found himself feeling more and more relaxed as his eyelids grew too heavy and he finally succumbed to slumber. "Whoa, nice pipes, Tsu," Jiru complimented in astonishment as she and some of the others watched Ajui walk over to the couch and gently lay Aizu down while pulling a nearby blanket over his body and tucking him in. "Tsu, that was… How did you do that, Tsu?" Uraraka exclaimed in disbelief. It seemed as though she, along with many others, didn't even think to try rocking him to sleep. The idea that perhaps all he needed was to take a nap never crossed their minds, which was a bit embarrassing. Ajui turned to face her classmates while holding up a long, slender finger to her lips in a shushing gesture, causing Uraraka to gasp before slapping her hands over her mouth upon realizing that she was being way too loud. At this point, Aizu was now sound asleep and had even stuck his thumb in his mouth to suckle on while he slept. Some of the students took out their phones to take pictures of the adorable sight. "That was very impressive, Tsu," Momo complimented. "How did you know?" Ajui smiled while gently bouncing the sleeping boy cradled in her arms. "I have 2 younger siblings around his age, so it wasn't all that hard to figure out what was wrong. Plus, he looked really tired, so what better way to help with that than to sing a lullaby to help him fall asleep?" "Well, your younger siblings are very lucky to have an older sister like you, Tsu. And I think Aizu would agree," Eri chirped, earning her a smile and a proud rip-bit from Ajui. It wasn't every day that Ajui showed her tender, big sister side to others, but when she did, she made sure to always make it count, especially when all someone needs is a little rest. "Tenya Ida." "Oh, Aizu stared in astonishment and wonder as he watched Ida running down the track field at neck-break speed. Ida was trying to beat his personal record, despite his record time being the best out of everyone in his class thanks to his quirk. His best record being 0.18 seconds, he wanted to shoot for at least 0.10 seconds or less. He'd been training his engines to produce more burst energy when running, jumping and kicking while increasing his running speed and stamina by running longer distances. Now, he's focusing on improving his speed in which he can run in a short amount of time, but no matter how fast he's able to run, he still doesn't think it's good enough and wants to do better. After finishing his 5th lap down the track, Ida stood panting and gasping while hunched over with his hands resting on his knees. Sweat dripped from his face and his glasses began to fog from the condensation. Just then he spotted someone approaching him out of the corner of his eye. Thinking it was one of his classmates, he quickly straightened up his posture, making it look as though he wasn't gasping for air and sweating bullets, when he realized it was Aizu coming over. The child ran over to him as fast as his little legs could go, carrying a hand towel and a bottle of water in his hands, and a huge smile spread across his freckled cheeks. "Tenya, that was so cool," Aizu cheered. "You were so fast I couldn't even keep my eyes on you. You zipped across the field like zip, zoom, fush. So cool." Ida, taken aback by the child's praise, allowed a genuine smile to appear on his sweat-covered face as he graciously accepted the towel and water offered to him by the boy while muttering a thanks as he quickly patted his face dry and took a swig of the water. "I'm pleased to know you thought so, Aizu. Unfortunately, I still haven't managed to beat my last record, so I cannot say that that was my absolute best." Aizu tilted his head and peered up at the stern teen in slight confusion. "Your absolute best?" he questioned softly. "But you did do your best, Tenya. You're like super fast. Faster than anybody, even me." Aizu fiddled with his hands bashfully while kicking at the dirt. "I wish I could go fast like you." Ida smirked proudly. "Well, fear not, Aizu. You're just as capable of becoming an outstanding athlete as anyone here, including myself. If you start exercising every day, maintain a balanced diet and discipline yourself, you can surely reach that goal of becoming just as fast as me. Well, maybe not as fast as me, given the nature of my quirk. In fact, without a quirk, I doubt you would be able to manage or maintain a speed anywhere close to my own." "Abu, but that's not to say you can't be a good runner or an athlete without a quirk. Not by any means. Absolutely not. Please, disregard that last comment. Ida frantically tried to backtrack his earlier statements while moving his hands in their normal chopping motions, having realized how insensitive he sounded when mentioning Aizu being quirkless. But to his surprise, rather than being upset or offended, Aizu was laughing. Ida, stopping his rambling and chopping movements, stared in wide-eyed and mouth-gaping disbelief as the child continued to giggle and laugh while that smile grew bigger and bigger. "You're so funny, Tenya," Aizu exclaimed through his giggles. Ida just stared at the boy while he mentally berated himself for his thoughtless words and comments. But judging from Aizu's reaction, his remarks weren't taken as seriously as he thought. Clearing his throat after regaining his composure, Ida began to speak, sounding much calmer. "I am so very sorry, Aizu. What I said a moment ago was completely inappropriate and calloused. I hadn't meant to say such offensive remarks about you in that manner." He then bowed his head to the boy. "Please, forgive me." Aizu came up to the teen and wrapped his arms around Ida's legs, causing the serious teen to jolt from the sudden contact before he looked down at the child hugging him. Aizu peered up at Ida and gazed sweetly at him. "It's okay, Tenya. I'm not upset. I know you didn't mean it." He nuzzled his cheek against Ida's thighs. "I know I won't ever be as fast as you, but if I try and work really, really hard, maybe I can be fast enough to catch up to you." Ida had no idea what to say, having not expected the boy to say something so sincere and genuine, and yet, Aizu's words spoke such volumes that it caused an unusual feeling to form in his chest. Smiling warmly at the boy, Ida got down onto his knees and patted his head. "I think you've got the right idea, Aizu. I think you can do just about anything." Aizu smiled brightly at the praise while a soft blush stained his cheeks. "I want to train just like you, Tenya. I want to be really fast so I can race you and Kakin and all the others." Aizu began to bounce back and forth on his feet with excitement, and it was at that moment an idea popped into Ida's head as he stood back up. "Well then, why don't I show you some simple tricks to help you get started?" he offered while placing his hands on his hips and puffing his chest out proudly. Aizu's eyes lit up as he smiled from ear to ear and nodded his head frantically. The rest of the afternoon played out. Ida would race down the track field alongside Aizu, at a fair speed so the child could keep up, of course, all while giving him tips and advice on how to run properly so he could go faster while conserving energy. He would show him how to carry his body, the best way to move his hips and legs while running, different speeds in which he could run in order to go faster, and at one point, Ida actually lifted Aizu up and placed him on his shoulders while running at full speed, so he could give Aizu an example of how his quirk functions while active, but in all honesty, he just wanted an excuse to give Aizu a ride, which the boy was having such a blast doing as he squealed with excitement and held his arms up in the air as if he were on a roller coaster. While Ida still had a long way to go before he felt he had reached his goal, in both becoming a hero and in beating every single one of his personal records, at least he had an adorable little fan who would always cheer him on from the sidelines. "Buchako Uraraka. I'm gonna getcha, Aizu." Aizu let out a squeaky laugh as he waved his arms around in a swimming motion to try and go faster in order to keep from getting captured by his pursuer, who happened to be none other than Ochako Uraraka. Moments ago, Aizu and Uraraka were outside playing when the girl came up with an idea for a new game they could play together. She explained how she had been training to use her quirk so she could control the distance between the ground and the person/thing she causes to float so anything she floats doesn't go too far into space. This was still something that needed to be worked on, but she was confident she could control her quirk enough to use on a live subject. And if worse came to worse, she could always release her quirk before Aizu got too high off the ground. Once Aizu was about 10 feet off the ground, she maintained the distance between Aizu and the ground and made sure to steady her powers so he didn't start floating towards the sky. The last thing she would want is for Aizu to accidentally end up out of reach. That would be hard to explain to Mirio. "Having fun, Aizu?" Uraraka called out while watching Aizu giggle his little head off and do spins and flips in the air. "Aha! I'm so high up." Uraraka laughed and smiled, seeing how much fun he was having before deciding to join him. Before enrolling in UA, Uraraka would always become nauseous the second she made herself float, and even after the first day of school, she didn't last very long before she ended up vomiting her guts out. But thanks to the intense quirk training she and her fellow classmates have gone through, her stamina and endurance had greatly improved, which has allowed her to reduce the feeling of nausea while also increasing her weight limit from 3 tons to up to 5 tons. Tapping herself on the shoulder with all 5 of her finger pads, Uraraka quickly began to float in the air while making sure to keep Aizu level in the air and not allowing him to float too high. Once she was level with him, she gave a playfully evil smirk and said in her best impression of a villainous voice, "Here I come, Aizu. I'm gonna get you." She then proceeded to use her quirk to thrust herself forward towards Aizu, who let out a squeak and then started to frantically swim away from the villain chasing him. Uraraka would purposefully slow herself down to allow Aizu a chance to escape before speeding herself up again to catch up with her victim. She would say things like, "I'm coming for you," and "You better run, Aizu," and "The big, bad villain's gonna catch you," and so on. This went on for a good 3 minutes before Uraraka started to feel the effects of her quirk being strained for too long as nausea crept into her stomach. Finally deciding to stop, Uraraka thrusted herself forward while her arms were outstretched before she finally reached her target and wrapped her arms around Aizu's tiny frame. Aizu squealed with laughter before wrapping his arms around the round-faced girl's neck. "You caught me, Ochako." Uraraka laughed softly while slowly lowering herself and Aizu back down to earth, doing her best to ignore the growing feeling of nausea. "I sure did. Did you have fun, Aizu?" Aizu smiled brightly and nodded. "I did. It was so much fun." Uraraka could feel her stomach churning uncomfortably and the acidic taste building in the back of her throat, but continued to ignore it while she smiled warmly at him. Finally, when they were less than 5 feet above the ground, while keeping a tight hold around Aizu's form, the girl pressed the pads of her fingers together to release her quirk, causing them to softly land back onto the ground with a light thud. Uraraka gently placed Aizu back on his feet, and as soon as she did, she turned around and blared. The sight and sound of Uraraka puking her guts out definitely caught Aizu by surprise as he frantically tried to help the girl by asking her if she was okay while patting her softly on the back. Uraraka tried to assure the boy she was okay even as she continued to retch and heave. Well, it seemed as though she still had a lot of work to do before she could go for long periods of time without feeling nauseous while floating herself. But despite vomiting up her breakfast and lunch, seeing the smile on Aizu's face and hearing his sweet, joy-filled laughter was well worth the sickness she felt. Mashireo Ojiro. Ojiro glanced over his shoulder in amusement as he watched Aizu's gaze following his tail back and forth while it swished around like a dog. Ojiro and a couple of his other classmates were sitting at one of the dining tables in their dorm building eating snacks and just chatting about random stuff when the martial arts teen spotted Aizu in his peripheral vision peering at him from behind the side of the couch. Pretending to not notice the child, Ojiro continued to chat with his friends when he saw Aizu sneakily coming closer until he was directly behind his chair and was now focused on his tail. He then noticed the way Aizu became fixated on his tail as it gently swayed from side to side. Deciding to have a little fun, he moved his tail back and forth some more and watched Aizu following it intently. It was kind of like watching a cat focusing on a laser pointer and following it no matter what. It was honestly kind of cute to watch. Then, he saw Aizu lift his hand and gingerly reach it out to touch the tail. He decided to have a little more fun with the boy by moving the appendage right when Aizu was about to touch the soft tuft of hair on the tip of his tail. This continued on for a good minute or so before Ojiro finally decided to stop and allow Aizu to finally catch his tail with a triumphant smile. Feigning ignorance, Ojiro pretended to act surprised by the sudden contact and turned to see Aizu hugging the tail to his chest. "Having fun?" Ojiro asked with a smirk. Aizu hummed in response while petting the hair on the end of the tail. Sure enough, the other students sitting with Ojiro at the table noticed Aizu sitting behind him playing with their friend's tail. They greeted him cheerfully while gushing over how cute he was playing with Ojiro's tail. Their gushing and cooing intensified tenfold when Ojiro maneuvered his tail underneath the child, who let out a sudden squeak when he was hoisted up off the ground while straddling the tail like a strange horse. He let out a giggle as Ojiro raised and lowered his tail up and down, essentially turning his appendage into a makeshift ride for the child's amusement. The others proceeded to pull out their phones to take pictures and videos of the overwhelming adorableness happening before them. The chance to record and capture such intense cuteness could not be squandered, and they made sure of that. And as for Ojiro, he simply sat there and allowed his classmates to do their thing while Aizu continued to play and have fun at his expense. Not that he minded. Aizu was well behaved and treated his precious tail with the same respect as he did its owner. And as long as it made the child happy and kept him entertained, who was he to stop him from having fun with his tail? Denki Kaminari. Kaminari came downstairs to find Aizu sitting in the living area and swiftly approached him with a cheerful smile, but as soon as he saw the big frown on his face, he instantly became concerned. "Hey little guy. What's got you so down?" he asked while rounding the couch to sit next to Aizu. Upon closer inspection, he noticed Aizu holding what looked to be a handheld gaming console that appeared to be off. Without looking up, Aizu let out a sad sigh and said, "My Game Boy won't work?" Kaminari felt his heart squeeze in his chest at the sadness in the child's voice before he held out his hand and asked, "Mind if I take a look at it?" Aizu nodded and handed his toy to the electric teen, who began inspecting it carefully. After a few seconds of looking to see what was wrong, Kaminari smiled and said, "Well, I think I found the issue." Aizu perked up, though still looking sad, and looked at the teen expectantly. "You've got yourself a dead battery here, little guy. It seems like it's completely out of juice." Kaminari turned to face Aizu with a smile. Aizu, while appearing relieved that the issue was found, still looked upset. But I don't have a new battery to replace it with." Kaminari gave a triumphant chuckle and said, "Luckily for you, I'm just the guy to fix that little issue. I'll simply use my quirk to refill this bad boy with some more juice, and then you'll be all set." Aizu stared at the teen with astonishment and asked, "Really? You can do that?" Aizu knew that Kaminari was able to produce his own electricity and had seen him use his quirk during training plenty of times, but he had no idea of the exact extent of his powers and how he was able to utilize them, such as, in this case, recharging dead batteries and making them functional again. It was a concept that was completely foreign to Aizu, and he was so excited to see it in action. With a huge smirk, Kaminari activated his quirk and allowed a few zaps of electricity to flow through the console in his hand, and once he knew the battery was fully charged, he handed it back to the boy who switched it on. As soon as the screen started to glow, Aizu's eyes lit up and were as bright as the screen of the console in his hands. With the biggest smile Kaminari had ever seen, Aizu turned to the electric teen and exclaimed, "Thank you so much, Denki." Kaminari gave a triumphant chuckle and smiled brightly at the child. "Not a problem, little dude. That's what heroes do. What's this about being a hero?" Kaminari and Aizu both turned to the sound of an amused voice, and spotted Jairu and Siro making their way over to the two. "Hi, Hanta. Hi, Kyuka." Aizu greeted cheerfully while waving his little hand at them. Jairu and Siro greeted the boy back before sitting down on the couch adjacent to them while watching Aizu hold out his Game Boy. "Look at what Denki did for me. He fixed my Game Boy. He made it come back to life." He sounded so proud of what the electric teen did, even more so than Kaminari did. Jairu, looking impressed, smiled and said, "Did he now? Well, that was nice of him, wasn't it?" Aizu smiled sweetly and nodded before turning his attention to his now working Game Boy and selecting a game to play on it. Siro then took this as a chance to tease his friend. "I'm surprised you didn't go all dunce face while charging Aizu's Game Boy, Kaminari." Jairu snorted and started to laugh while poking fun at Kaminari. "PFFFTT haha, right?" Knowing him, he'd totally try and impress Aizu by going all out with showing off his electricity. While Kaminari grew embarrassed with his friend's comments and started to whine about them making fun of him, Aizu gave the teens a confused look while tilting his head to the side. "What's dunce face?" he questioned innocently, looking so much like an intrigued little puppy, which was so cute. Jairu, all too amused by the situation and ever so eager to answer the curious child's question, piped up and said, "Oh, it's just a name we use for Kaminari whenever he uses his quirk too much, which turns him into a total dunce. Hence the name." Jairu couldn't keep from laughing at Kaminari's expense, not that he was doing much to defend himself and his character, since, well, they weren't wrong. Suddenly, Aizu's curious confusion turned into curious excitement as he sat up in his spot on the couch, his Game Boy left abandoned next to him, and began to lightly bounce up and down. "Can I see it? Can I? Please? I want to see. I want to see the dunce face." Kaminari suddenly felt cornered as he looked around, glancing between his two incredibly amused friends and an overly excited Aizu who looked like he was getting ready to witness a magic trick. As much as it made him feel immensely embarrassed to be reduced to his short-circuited self after overusing his quirk, Kaminari also couldn't resist that adorable smile and those bright emerald eyes as Aizu gazed at him with excitement. So, with a defeated sigh and every last ounce of dignity he could muster up, Kaminari focused all of his energy into one giant electricity activation as he lit up like a bright candle with buzzing electric power. By the time it was finally over, Kaminari was reduced to a short-circuited, derpy-faced version of himself, also known famously as the dunce face. And the results? A massive laughing fit from Aizu, Siro and Jair respectively, and poor Kaminari who could only give pitiful thumbs-ups and utter the words, he dash, with the same derpy expression he wore the first time Aizu saw the famous dunce face in the flesh. Overall, as much as Kaminari didn't like his classmates laughing at his own expense, he was more than happy with making an utter fool of himself if it meant making his favorite little green bean laugh and smile. Aijiro Kirishima. Aizu watched the redhead intently as he and Bakugo sparred during training one day. Every so often he would break his gaze away from the two in favor of writing something down in his beloved quirk analysis notebook, but he wasn't writing just any notes down, but rather he was writing down some new notes on Aijiro Kirishima himself. It was no secret to anyone who knew the boisterous teen that his quirk was hardening. He demonstrated this fact every chance he got, whether it was during training practice or simply as a means to emphasize a statement. He didn't use his powers to intimidate or threaten others in the same way Bakugo would with his explosions, but he would use it to express his anger or frustration, which was oftentimes always verbal. One thing Aizu had noticed was the redhead's use of the words manly and unmanly. He wasn't sure what Kirishima meant when he used those words when describing certain things or actions, so he decided to try and figure it out on his own. Plus, Kirishima just seemed like such a fun person to be around despite how scary he looked when his quirk was fully activated, and while he's gotten to spend time with the outgoing redhead, Aizu hasn't had a lot of opportunities in terms of one-on-one time with Kirishima to really get a sense of what his character was like. While Kirishima wiped his face with a towel after his sparring session with Bakugo had ended, he caught Aizu staring at him before the child quickly broke eye contact and buried his face in the pages of his notebook. The redhead gave a friendly wave while smiling sweetly at the boy who bashfully waved back. It was so cute seeing the child have these brief moments of shyness despite being outgoing around the students. Back at Heights Alliance, Kirishima decided to get to know the child better by having some one-on-one time with him. After all, the manliest thing a hero can do is get to know the people he wants to protect better. Once he found Aizu, he smiled widely when he found the boy watching an anime on the TV, but not just any anime. It just so happened to be a hero-themed anime featuring his all-time favorite pro hero as the main character, and the hero who was the inspiration for his own hero name, Crimson Riot. Without scaring the boy too much since he didn't seem to notice his presence yet, Kirishima plopped down next to him on the couch, making the cushion dip and bounce lightly. Aizu, noticing the added weight next to him, glanced up and was pleasantly surprised to see the redhead himself sitting beside him. Kirishima flashed a big, friendly, sharp-toothy grin at the boy and said, "Hiya, Aizu. Mind if I join you?" Aizu nodded happily, appearing quite pleased with the extra company, before turning his attention back to the show. Kirishima crossed his legs so that his shin was resting on his knee and laid an arm over the back of the couch just behind Aizu's head while a relaxed smile graced over his face. "So, you like Crimson Riot?" Kirishima asked, hoping to engage the boy in conversation to try and get to know him better. Aizu, without looking away from the screen, nodded his head and said, "Yeah. He's really cool, and I like his hair." Kirishima grinned with delight at the boy's response. "Haha, I know, right? He's totally cool looking and so manly," Kirishima stated while lifting his fist up and clutching it in emphasis. "He's my favorite pro hero of all time." Aizu tore his gaze from the TV and looked to the redhead curiously. Is that why your hero name is Red Riot? He asked, sounding genuinely interested. Kirishima nodded with a huge grin. I sure did. He's the reason why I wanted to become a hero in the first place. His ideology and spirit is something I admire and idolize with a fiery passion. He even has a similar quirk to mine. Which is why I wish to become a hero who values the power of will above that of power in strength alone. One who doesn't fear death and failure even in the worst of situations. That's the kind of hero I aspire to be. Kirishima was so pumped up and excited that he hadn't realized that he was now standing in front of a stunned Aizu who simply stared in awe at him. Just then, Kirishima quickly realized what he was doing before sitting back down with a look of embarrassment on his face. Sorry about that, hee. Didn't mean to get all worked up like that. He rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly, a deep blush staining his face. But Aizu didn't seem to mind at all as he smiled brightly at the redhead, seeming to be quite pleased with his fiery enthusiasm. You're so cool, Ag. Kirishima whipped his head around and stared at Aizu in astonishment. Wadash. Really? You think so? Aizu nodded gleefully. You're so cool, Ag, even cooler than Crimson Riot. An even deeper blush stained the redhead's cheeks, but not from embarrassment, but rather from flattery. Shucks. I'm not that cool. He was starting to feel like his old middle school self who was self-conscious of himself and didn't think there was anything special about his quirk. But Aizu was there to prove him wrong with a defiant shake of the head. Nah. You are really cool, Ag. Like really, really cool. And I'll keep calling you cool until you believe me. Aizu declared defiantly while crossing his arms over his chest, acting as though he had just issued a real threat which only made him look even more adorable. Kirishima, unable to argue with the stubborn little cutie, let out a long sigh and grinned at the child. You win, Aizu. I guess I'm pretty cool, huh? Pleased with the redhead's answer, Aizu smiled a big toothy grin while puffing out his little chest proudly. You're super cool. Then he remembered something and quickly mentioned it. And so manly. Kirishima did not expect the boy to use that word to refer to him, but it did the trick in making him feel so good about himself. To the point where he hopped up to his feet again and scooped the boy into his arms before spinning around while Aizu squealed and giggled with glee. You know what, Aizu? You're pretty manly too. In fact, you're just as manly as me and Crimson Riot. Aizu gasped and said, You think I'm manly? Kirishima nodded. Sure do. You're the manliest little dude I've ever met in my life. And I bet Crimson Riot would agree with me, too, Aizu had never felt more confident in himself than he did in that moment, and he couldn't stop smiling as he repeated the phrase back to Kirishima, who then repeated it back to him, as if they were echoing the same word back and forth to each other. From that point forward, Aizu was regarded as the second manliest boy in Class 1 as Heights Alliance, coined by Kirishima himself. And anyone who argued the fact or said otherwise would have the one and only Red Riot to deal with. Kuji smiled fondly at the boy whose hand he was gently holding in his own large one as they walked through the forest just outside of the training grounds of the school. Aizu hadn't spent a lot of time around the Ani voice quirk user aside from getting to see his pet bunny not too long ago, and now was the perfect time for the two to have some one-on-one time, especially when Kuji had a bit of a surprise in store for the child. They continued walking for a moment before Kuji stopped near a large tree. He glanced down at Aizu, who was peering around the forest curiously, before asking in a quiet voice, You want to see something really cool, Aizu? Aizu glanced up at the towering teen and nodded his head yes. Kuji released the child's hand and gave a quick indication to stay put before he briskly rushed past the bushes, disappearing out of Aizu's line of sight. Though he knew he wasn't in any danger, Aizu couldn't help but feel nervous standing all alone in the unfamiliar woods. He began to fiddle with the hem of his shirt anxiously while fidgeting where he stood. It was a beautiful day with hardly any clouds in the sky, and there was nice breeze that blew through the branches and softly brushed against Aizu's face, but even that didn't keep his nerves from sparking into a slight sense of panic. Nearly 2 minutes had passed when Aizu was just about to call out to the teen, wondering where he went off to, when he suddenly heard movement coming from the bushes where he saw Kuji disappear behind just moments ago. Aizu perked up instantly and turned to look at the bush where the rustling noise was coming from, thinking it was Kuji. But what emerged from the bush wasn't Kuji, but rather, Aizu let out a soft gasp when he saw a baby deer poking his head out before it slowly stepped out and stood there in full view, its little nose sniffing around before it looked directly at the startled boy who froze in place. Aizu had never seen a deer before, let alone a baby one. Although he'd seen them in picture books and certain TV shows, he had no idea what to do. He wanted to come closer and get a better look, but he was afraid of scaring the fawn away. He flinched when more rustling came from the same bush, only this time, it was Kuji, smiling cheerfully as he carefully made his way back over to Aizu's side. But before Aizu could say anything, Kuji gently shushed him before turning to face the fawn with a reassuring smile. Just then, the baby deer tentatively came closer until it was less than a couple feet away. Aizu just stared at the animal in shock as he watched it stretch its neck so its head was within reaching distance. Aizu seemed unsure of what to do or if he should do anything except stay perfectly still, but then, Kuji placed a comforting hand on his back and said in a soft voice, "She wants you to pet her." Aizu glanced up at him, looking unsure. Kuji simply nodded. "It's okay, she's friendly." Aizu glanced back and forth between the fawn and the teen, and after much contemplation, he swallowed hard and timidly held out his hand to the baby deer. Without missing a beat, the fawn licked the child's hand a few times before rubbing her face against his palm. Feeling much more relaxed and less anxious, Aizu smiled while slowly and gently petting the fawn's head and face. He felt himself growing more brave as he started to pet along her neck and back. Just then, more rustling came from behind the same bush, and to Aizu's utter shock, another deer appeared, but this time, it was a full-grown female deer, likely the fawn's mother. Aizu looked back at Kuji, who gave him a reassuring smile and gestured for him to go and meet the doe. Feeling a lot more confident, he stood up carefully and went to greet the large deer. Just like with her baby, the doe allowed Aizu to pet her while she softly nudged her face against his hand and even started to lick his face, making the child giggle. "I think she likes you," Kuji said with a chuckle. Aizu continued to giggle as the doe licked his face and even started to lick the top of his head, causing his hair to stick up in all different directions. "She's cleaning me," Aizu squeaked out with a huge smile. The baby came over and rubbed her face against Aizu's other hand, as if she were asking for him to keep petting her, which Aizu happily did. And just when he didn't think it could get any better, Kuji surprised him even further. Other animals started to appear, much to Aizu's ecstatic glee. Woodland critters of all types were now surrounding him: rabbits, squirrels, chipmunks, and even several different types of birds. It was unlike anything Aizu had ever seen or experienced, and while it was all so new, he found himself enjoying the company of all the different animals around him. And to his surprise, the animals seemed quite fond of him as well, especially the deer. "How did you do this, Kuji?" Aizu asked while crouching down to pet a squirrel which crawled onto his lap. "My quirk allows me to communicate with all types of animals, and I knew that most of these animals had homes near the school, so I thought I would surprise you by introducing them to you." Aizu's eyes became huge. "You can talk to animals?" he asked while a rabbit hopped over and nestled against his thigh. Kuji nodded. "Yep, all animals, even my pet bunny. She said she thinks you're a very sweet boy, and you can come and see her anytime." This made the boy immensely happy to hear as he smiled cheerfully and turned his attention back to the woodland animals. "What about them? What do they think of me?" Kuji looked to the animals surrounding the child and asked, "What do you think, guys? Aizu's pretty nice, isn't he?" All the animals made various and distinct noises and sounds that Aizu didn't understand, but it was obvious that they could understand what the teen was saying. Kuji, looking pleased with their answer, said, "They all said you're very friendly and nice, and the mother doe said you smell like pine needles, which she likes a lot." Aizu giggled with a big smile as he went back to petting all the animals. This went on for some time, with Aizu asking a question for the animals, Kuji relaying the questions to them, and Kuji translating what the animals said. It was very interesting and a lot of fun, and Aizu would always remember this experience for the rest of his life. When the sun started to go down, Kuji and Aizu bid the animals farewell before they began making their way back to the dorms while the large teen held the child's hand. "Did you have fun, Aizu?" Kuji asked while looking down at the boy. Aizu smiled and nodded his head. Kuji chuckled. "I'm glad. Maybe if the school says it's okay, I can take you to the zoo so you can meet and talk with the animals there." Aizu became instantly excited at the idea. "Yeah, I want to meet all the animals at the zoo." He began to lightly skip while still holding Kuji's hand. "I've never been to the zoo, but Miri and I said that all kinds of animals live there and it's like their home. Can Miri and I come to the zoo too?" Kuji smiled and nodded. "Sure. The more the merrier. We can invite everyone to go with us." And for the rest of the day, that was all Aizu would talk about, was getting to meet all the animals he could. Even wild animals could see just how innocent and pure Aizu truly was, and as it turned out, he now had friends and allies in both man and beast. Rikidu Satu. "And here's a slice of red velvet cake with cream cheese frosting. Dig in, buddy," Rikidu said with a proud smiling as he set the small dish in front of the excited boy. Aizu stabbed his fork into the slice of cake and stuck a piece of it into his awaiting mouth with such vigor that Rikidu had to tell him to not choke. Shortly after watching Aizu stick the dessert into his mouth, the teen became elated upon seeing the look of pure bliss envelop the child's face as he chewed down the cake while making satisfied noises. Aizu had become the sugary teen's #1 taste tester when it came to his baking skills, and Aizu was always open to trying any sweets offered to him. What kid wouldn't want to eat fresh baked treats? No kid, that's for sure. "I'm glad to see you liked it, Aizu," Rikidu exclaimed with a big grin. He took the empty plate from Aizu while helping to wipe his face clean of crumbs and icing. "Are you up for trying another?" Aizu was quick to nod his head at the offer while sporting the biggest grin possible, his large emerald eyes sparkling like gems. So far, Aizu's gotten to try several different types of cake flavors, including angel food cake, pound cake, triple chocolate cake, and even carrot cake. Rikido had been in the mood to bake a bunch of different cake recipes lately, and luckily he had his favorite little tyke around to try out his baked goods, and even if the child wasn't available for taste testing, Rikido would always be sure to save a slice for the boy to try later. Aizu lightly bounced up and down in his chair, clapping his hands together excitedly when a couple other students came downstairs to find Aizu sitting in the dining room. "Hey there, little dude," Kirishima greeted cheerfully. "What you're up to?" Aizu turned to face the redhead with a huge smile. "Ricky's feeding me cake," he chirped in response before turning his attention back to the sugary teen who came over with another plate, this time with a slice of strawberry shortcake. "Damn, that looks good," Kaminari exclaimed, eyeing the slice of cake. "You in a baking mood or something, dude?" Rikidu nodded. "Yeah, something like that. I know I've been doing a lot of baking during sugar time, but then I realized that Aizu hasn't had a chance to really try some of my cooking, so I figured, I'd give him some samples." That was only a half-truth. In reality, he'd developed a soft spot for the sweet little boy, and had been itching to spoil him with sweets for a while, and since it was his turn to babysit, now was a better time than any. Ciro, noticing the mess in the kitchen and the numerous dirty plates filling up the sink, gave a raised eyebrow look to his classmates. "Hey, dude, how much cake has Aizu had?" Kaminari nodded in agreement while watching Aizu take a huge bite out of the slice of cake. "Yeah, man, you better be careful with feeding him too much, don't want him to get fat." Rikidu chuckled while petting Aizu's hair. "Oh, come on, don't say that. Aizu's pretty skinny, so gaining a little bit of squish won't kill him." His friends gave a look to each other before Kaminari replied to the sugary teen's comment. "Yeah, but still, you should be careful how much you feed him. He might get sick if he eats too much cake. I don't think Tagata-senpai would be very happy to find his little bro with a stomachache." Rikidu, understanding where his classmates were coming from, gave an understanding nod and turned to Aizu, who just finished his cake. With a smile, he said, "All right, little guy, I think that's enough." He reached out to take the empty plate while not missing the sad and disappointed look on Aizu's crumb-covered face. After setting the dish in the sink, he came back over and ruffled the child's hair while chuckling softly. "Don't you worry. You'll get a chance to try more of my desserts later. But for now, I think you've had enough. Plus, I don't think your big brother would be happy if you ended up having an upset tummy." Tell you what, next time you and I get to spend time together, I'll let you help me with baking more cakes and sweets, what do you say? Aizu, despite his disappointment, smiled and nodded, liking the idea of helping the sugary teen with baking sweets. He knew that Mirio really wouldn't be too happy to find him with an upset stomach from eating too much cake. Plus, with all that sugar, it would be impossible for him to go to bed because he was full of energy. So Rikidu and the others were right to not give him any more. Here you go, Aizu. Rikidu set a tall glass of milk in front of the boy with a smile. Aizu gladly accepted the glass with a thanks before taking a long swig of it. Once the glass was empty, Rikidu took the glass and got to work cleaning up his mess. As he was about to get to work, he felt a slight tug on his shirt. He looked down and saw Aizu standing there with a knowing look on his face. Can I help you clean up, Ricky? Rikidu smiled brightly and ruffled the boy's hair. Of course. I can always use some help. And so, Aizu was tasked with drying the dishes. Kirishima, Kaminari and Shiro also pitched in to help the two clean. They worked together to tidy up the mess, with Rikidu and Shiro washing the dishes, Aizu and Kaminari drying them, and Kirishima putting the dishes back in the cupboard. While Rikidu didn't think his cooking was anything special despite his classmates saying otherwise, he was always more than happy to share his baked goods with Aizu, who made it very clear he had one heck of a sweet tooth.